Beaumont Hills hadn't changed, not really. The air still smelled of manicured roses and superiority. 9 years gone, and yet every cobblestone on the path to the country club's entrance still remembered the soles of my old shoes. Maybe that's why I didn't hesitate when I stepped out of the black car and adjusted my cufflinks. My name wasn't on the guest list. I knew that the moment I opened the email invitation I was never meant to receive. But this wasn't about courtesy. It wasn't even about closure. It was about showing them I still existed. No, more than that, I'd evolved. The chandeliers inside dripped light like gold tears, sparkling with the weight of old money. The kind that forgets people like me ever existed. I wasn't supposed to be in that room, but I walked in like it belonged to me anyway. I felt the music roll over me, the polite laughter, the hiss of expensive champagne being poured into thinner-than-air flutes. My shoes clicked against marble that cost more than my first apartment, but I didn't blink. If anything, I smiled. The moment was cinematic. And in every good film, there's always that beat of silence before the crowd notices something or someone. That beat ended when Claudia Whitmore's ice-chipped voice sliced through the air. Her posture, upright and proud, snapped like a bowstring as her eyes found me. The conversation around her paused. Champagne flutes stilled mid-air. "Why is this failure here?" she demanded, her words not even whispered, not even cloaked in the passive aggression this crowd was so known for. "No," she said it aloud. Proud. Cruel. And, honestly, expected. She looked exactly the same, stiff shoulders, pearls wound around her throat like a leash she gave herself permission to wear. I didn't flinch. Then came Juliet. My ex-wife stood near the marble bar, laughing with a circle of women whose perfume smelled like designer guilt and whose heels clicked like judgment. She turned slowly, graceful as ever, and let her eyes skim me with the same disinterest you'd give to a fly on your wine glass. "You're not on the guest list," she said, voice honeyed and sharp. There she was, Juliet Whitmore. Once my wife, now a stranger wrapped in sequins and smirks. Her dress glittered like it had something to prove. I remembered when I used to unzip those dresses, back when she still laughed with her eyes and called my name in the dark like it meant something. Now, her eyes barely moved as she dismissed me. That should have been the end. They expected me to turn around, to leave, to shrink like a good ex-husband and disappear into whatever they imagined a failure, like me did after the credits rolled. But I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg for dignity. I smiled. Slow. Sharp. The kind of smile you give someone right before the storm begins. "That's the thing about ghosts," I said, my voice low enough that only the nearest tables could hear, but loud enough for the echo to carry. "We show up when the house is still haunted." And I watched it land. The words curled around Claudia's throat. Juliet's gaze didn't waver, but her fingers twitched ever so slightly around the stem of her glass. Her friends whispered behind manicured hands. The music kept playing, but it felt quieter somehow, as if the room itself was tilting toward the tension like iron toward a magnet. I didn't stay long after that. I didn't need to. I walked the length of that ballroom like a man walking through a museum of his own past. Everything was just as I remembered. Gilded frames, oil paintings of donors with empty eyes. A world that once decided I wasn't worthy, that once spat me out like gum under a shoe. But the difference? This time, I wasn't here to beg for re-entry. I was here to remind them that I never left. As I reached the exit, someone muttered, "Was that Silas?" Silas Whitmore. The name still sounded strange on other people's tongues. I kept it, legally, not because I needed their name, but because I wanted it on every document, every news article, every plaque that bore my work. Let them see it and remember that I was the man they tried to erase. Outside, the air was crisp. The valet blinked at me, clearly not recognizing the man standing in a custom-tailored suit with the jaw of someone who'd rebuilt himself. "Car for Silas Whitmore," I said evenly. As he sprinted off, I let myself look back at the club just once. Not in longing, but in warning. I had returned. And this time, I wasn't coming empty-handed. They like to rewrite history in places like Beaumont Hills. Polished lies, subtle omissions, memories scrubbed clean with money and influence. But I remember everything. I wasn't always an outsider. Once, I stood at the center of that world, Juliet's world. Her husband, her partner, her so-called equal. I was the man who held her shaking hands when her first boutique opened, and the one who stayed up nights balancing her books when her dream felt like a nightmare. I sketched her storefront on the back of a napkin at a diner we couldn't afford. poured sweat and ideas into turning her fashion fantasies into a brand the Whitmores could finally brag about. But I was never really family. Not to them. They treated me like a novelty at first. The architect from East Side Ridge, gritty, humble, tragically gifted. Something to show off at galas when diversity became trendy. Gregory Whitmore once told a friend I was Juliet's project with potential. That should have been the first red flag. Instead, I smiled through every backhanded compliment, convinced love would make the difference. It didn't. It started unraveling slowly. Little things. Claudia correcting my grammar in front of donors. Juliet laughing too hard when I mispronounced the name of a French designer. Her father recommending I take fewer meetings, focus more on being supportive. Then came that night. A Whitmore family dinner. White linen, long crystal glasses, conversation sharp enough to draw blood. Juliet wore this red dress that hugged her like it had been stitched by devotion itself. I remember watching her laugh at something her cousin said, her eyes flitting to mine, and I thought, maybe we were still okay. But halfway through dessert, I saw Claudia whisper something into Gregory's ear. He nodded once, expression unreadable. The table kept chatting, smiling, toasting. I had no idea that while I was eating their creme brulee, they were finalizing my eviction. I came home that night, stomach full but chest tight. Something felt wrong. The porch light wasn't on. The door was locked. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Wrong key, faulty lock. I tried again. Then again. My key wouldn't turn. I knocked. No answer. I circled to the back, where we used to sneak out to the garden with wine and stolen kisses, and found 2 suitcases waiting on the porch bench. Mine. Lined up like a goodbye. My phone buzzed. Juliet. No explanation. No apology. Just 4 words. You'll land on your feet. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, mind racing. I called her. She didn't pick up. Minutes later, Gregory pulled up in his black Jaguar. Stepped out with that corporate calm he wore like armor. No tie, just power and entitlement rolled into one. This is for the best, he said, like he was doing me a favor. You'll thank us later. Then he left. And that was it. No confrontation. No tears. Just an unspoken decision made over brandy and privilege. I remember sitting beside my suitcases under that cold porch light. The silence louder than any scream. I stared at that door, our door, wondering how love could be that quiet when it ended. They didn't just break up with me. They deleted me. In the weeks that followed, I disappeared from the website of Juliet's boutique. My bio gone. My sketches replaced. Even my photos at store openings vanished. It was like I'd never existed. People we used to call friends stopped answering my calls. Texts went unread. Social invites vanished. I tried to sleep in my car the first night. I told myself it was temporary. By the 3rd night, the lie cracked. I moved onto a friend's couch, Terrence, one of the few who didn't disappear with the rest. I owe him more than he knows. I'd walk through the city in those days with nothing but a sketch pad and a numb'ache in my chest. I remember seeing one of my old storefront designs downtown, Juliet's name glowing on the sign like it had always been hers alone. A stranger posed for a selfie in front of it. They called her an icon of elegance and originality in the article I read later that night. My designs. My concept. My hands. But to the world? Her legacy. That was the hardest part, not the couch, or the hunger, or the humiliation, but the silence. No one came to check on me. Not Juliet. Not her family. Not even the ones who once toasted me at our wedding with expensive champagne and fake affection. They didn't just throw me out. They rewrote the narrative. Made me the man who left. The man who failed. Who couldn't keep up. But the truth? They were afraid of what I could become without them. And that's exactly what I planned to show them. Rock bottom wasn't a metaphor for me. It was a real place. A one-room studio that smelled like yeast and burnt coffee, perched above a bakery where the oven never stopped humming. The walls were cracked, the radiator clanged like it was angry to still be alive, and my only window looked out onto an alley where trash cans outnumbered people. But it was mine. A door I could lock. A roof I could sleep under without listening for a car engine or the footsteps of someone coming to kick me out again. I worked odd jobs, freelance drafting mostly. Small-time stuff for underfunded contractors who didn't care if you had a firm name or a logo, just that you delivered. I'd sketch up kitchen renovations, redesign basements, draw patios for suburban families who wanted to pretend they were in Tuscany. I'd deliver furniture on weekends, my back aching from lifting luxury couches into homes I could never afford. But even at my lowest, I never stopped drawing. My sketchbook was my constant. While the world ignored me, it listened. I poured ideas into it like it was a vault, cityscapes I imagined, commercial spaces that pulsed with life, neighborhoods that breathed. When I was exhausted, broke, invisible, I still designed. That's when I met Terrence Clay. He wasn't flashy. No cufflinks, no gold watch. Just a kind face worn down by years of deadlines and disappointment. He saw me at a community design expo where I'd hung a few renderings on a sad, unlit corkboard next to a table of free pins. I didn't even expect anyone to notice. But Terrence stared at one of my designs for a good 5 minutes, one of my favorites, a modern mixed-use structure designed to look like it grew out of the earth. "You did this?" he asked. I nodded, unsure if I should feel proud or ashamed. "I've got a small development firm," he said. "We do mid-budget work. Nothing flashy. But I could use someone with vision." That's how it started. The first job was nothing, just drawing floor plans for a low-income housing project in Westlake. I did it in 2 days and emailed it back. Thought that would be it. But then came another job. Then another. Soon, I was no longer just the guy sketching in the background. I was offering design insight, running point on meetings, visiting sites. We worked late nights out of his garage-turned office, drinking bitter coffee and dreaming about better cities. After 6 months, Terrence said, "Let's stop being quiet about what we're building. Let's put both our names on this." We called it Clay and Knox Urban Designs. It was humble at first. Small office, smaller budget. But we worked smart. Took the jobs no one else wanted. Redeveloped flood zones. Converted abandoned strip malls into community centers. The money wasn't glamorous, but the impact? That was everything. By the end of year 3, our name was on contracts across the state. By year 5, we were competing with legacy firms. By year 7, we were being mentioned in national design journals, praised for revitalizing cities without erasing their soul. Our headquarters moved to a glass building downtown, designed by me, of course. Staff grew. Influence multiplied. Investors called. Mayors invited us to ribbon cuttings. And I still remembered the night I slept in my car, watching condensation fog up the windows, my heart feeling like a wound that wouldn't close. Now, I walked into meetings in suits tailored better than Juliet's wedding gown. I flew first class. I spoke on urban policy panels. And not once, did I send a single press release to the Whitmores. I let my work speak. Because success is loud in the right rooms. I knew they'd hear about me eventually. I imagined them flipping through an issue of Modern Builder and seeing my name under a headline about a $1 billion redevelopment plan. I pictured Claudia's face tightening, Gregory folding the page sharply, Juliet pretending not to care while Googling me in private. But still, I said nothing. Until fate sent me an invitation. It was a gala for a nonprofit called Urban Futures, a group Clay and Knox had quietly supported for years. The Whitmores were hosting it, proudly splashing their names across every banner. They never realized I had joined the nonprofit's board 6 months prior. When the coordinator emailed to thank me for my contributions and offered VIP access to the event, I didn't hesitate. I RSVP'd yes. No pseudonym. No modesty. Silas Knox Whitmore. Yes, I had kept the name. Not because I needed theirs, but because I wanted them to live with mine. The man they erased? He'd become the storm they never prepared for. And now? I wasn't just walking back into their world. I was redesigning it. Some weapons don't make noise. They don't explode or cut. They don't need blood or bruises to leave damage. Some weapons are silent, built from restraint, precision, and timing. I became one of those. While the Whitmores paraded around in champagne-drenched circles, still clinging to the illusion of control, I was designing cities. They bragged about gala turnouts and new store launches. I signed deals with government officials and urban renewal boards. They stayed loud. I chose silence. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I knew when I finally did, it would be impossible to ignore. Clay and Knox Urban Designs didn't need commercials or glittering press releases. We let our work do the talking. Neighborhoods once left behind were now vibrant again, parks, schools, clean transit routes, affordable housing that didn't look like punishment. We took cities that were falling apart and helped stitch them back together, block by block. We built hope in concrete form. Our firm opened satellite offices in New York, Atlanta, San Diego. Quiet expansions. Nothing flashy. No need to flex. People came to us because we delivered on time, with vision and integrity. And still, I said nothing publicly about what happened years ago. Not about Juliet. Not about the Whitmores. not about the empire they built on a man they erased. But then came the invitation. A gala hosted by the Whitmore family, benefiting Urban Futures, a nonprofit I'd joined the board of 6 months prior. It was almost poetic. In their rush to be seen as philanthropic darlings, they'd failed to realize that the very organization they were boosting already had my fingerprints on it. The event coordinator, nice woman, probably didn't even know the history, sent me a warm, personalized email. Thanked me for my consistent support. Offered me a VIP ticket and encouraged me to attend in person. I remember sitting in my office when I read the email. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with light. My desk, custom-made from reclaimed wood, felt cool under my fingertips as I stared at the screen. The irony was rich, but the opportunity? Priceless. So I made a call. Told the coordinator I'd be there. No hesitation. No disguises. When she asked what name to print on my pass, I answered without pause, Silas Knox Whitmore. I heard the click of her keyboard through the line. She read it back to me. The name that still had weight in their world. The name they thought I'd scrubbed off like a bad tattoo. I just want to confirm, Whitmore is still your legal surname, she asked politely. Yes, I said. I kept it. Not because it belonged to them, but because I had earned it. Because it was tied to every blueprint, every contract, every award I'd built after they shut me out. Because every time someone in their circle saw it stamped across a project that changed lives, they'd be forced to remember the man they tried to discard. And now, I wasn't coming back with bitterness in my chest or vengeance on my breath. I came armed with the quiet weapon I had forged from years of silence, success. But I wasn't just attending. I had a plan. Because a few weeks before the gala, I discovered something. Something ugly. Something criminal. Juliet had never stopped using my designs. At first, it was a rumor, an intern at a planning office recognizing my signature style on a new Whitmore Foundation development. I brushed it off. Coincidence, maybe. But curiosity turned to suspicion. I had my team run checks. Quietly, discreetly. Then I hired a digital forensics consultant. We dug deeper. And there it was. Designs that were unmistakably mine. Blueprints I had drawn during our marriage. Sketches I never published, never approved for commercial use. Somehow, they had been dusted off, repackaged, and stamped with her name. Worse, federal grant applications had been filed using credentials that traced back to my old login info. Signatures that were, without question, mine. Forged. I knew the strokes, the curves, the pressure points of that pen. It was identity theft wrapped in silk and stitched into the seams of designer gowns. She'd built her post-divorce brand off stolen work. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I documented, collected, verified. Then I slid every piece of evidence, digital files, access logs, forged documents, into a sleek folder tucked inside my inner coat pocket. I wasn't attending that gala for theatrics. I was going with purpose. This wasn't a grand reveal fueled by bitterness. It was a reclamation. Years of silence had given them space to rewrite the past. Now, I was reclaiming the truth, one detail at a time. And I would do it not with chaos, but with clarity, with proof. Because sometimes, the most powerful way to return is not by knocking on the door, but by already having the keys to every room they thought you'd never enter again. It was surreal, walking through those doors again. The Beaumont Hills Country Club hadn't aged. Not one bit. The marble floors still shone like polished bone, the orchids still too pristine to be real. Even the air held that same sterile perfume of wealth and preservation, like nothing had ever gone wrong here. But this time, I walked in differently. I didn't slouch. I didn't skim the room like I didn't belong. I knew exactly who I was now, and I made sure every step said so. The concierge greeted me without question. "Welcome, Mr. Whitmore," he said, checking the list and handing me a silver-trimmed pass. The irony clung to the corners of my mouth like a laugh I hadn't quite released. They had to print that name again. Swallow it. Announce it. Embrace it. I made my way toward the ballroom, my eyes gliding across the crowd already gathering jewels, tailored tuxedos, gowns stitched tighter than truths. The room glittered with money, the kind that never needed to ask questions, only make statements. And tonight, my presence was a statement. Every detail of my appearance was calculated. Charcoal suit, matte black tie, cufflinks shaped like drafting tools, a wink to who I was before they tried to erase me. But I didn't walk in looking for a spotlight. I didn't need it. The moment Claudia Whitmore saw me, the reaction did all the work. She froze. It was beautiful, how her grip on her champagne flute tightened just a little, the way her mouth parted slightly but no words came out yet. Her eyes scanned the room, as if she were looking for a staff member to blame for this breach of exclusivity. "Why is this failure here?" she finally hissed, loud enough for the nearby tables to turn their heads. There it was. That contempt. That certainty that the wall she built would always keep people like me out. But I wasn't rattled. I had walked through fire and rebuilt myself brick by brick with those same flames. Her words didn't slice anymore. They skimmed off the armor I'd forged in silence. Juliet stood just a few feet behind her mother, near the display of donated auction items. Silver shimmered down her body like liquid moonlight. She looked like everything I once fought to protect, and now wouldn't take back if offered. Her friends, the same circle of manicured vultures who once laughed at my middle-class background, fluttered around her like jeweled moths. Juliet glanced at me. No shock, no warmth. Just a smirk, smooth and practiced. "You're not on the guest list," she said, just loud enough for nearby ears. And for a moment, I almost pitied her, because she had no idea how much that sentence revealed about her. About the house of mirrors she still lived in. About the way she still thought she could dismiss a man with a sentence. I didn't react immediately. I just stared at her, then let my lips curl. "Strange," I said evenly, considering I helped fund this event. And just like that, the room tilted. Heads turned. I shifted. The whispering started before I even finished the sentence. A few people lowered their drinks. Some actually looked at their programs, maybe scanning the donor list. Claudia's flute trembled in her hand. Her painted lips thinned to a single line. Juliet's smirk didn't vanish, but it faltered. Her mouth twitched, unsure whether to laugh it off or ask for confirmation. "I'm on the Urban Futures Board," I added, my voice calm, unbothered. "And I've been one of the major contributors for the past 6 months." Now the whispers were louder. Someone said my name aloud, Silas Whitmore. The words floated above the jazz music like a dart through a balloon. Claudia recovered first. Always the seasoned social strategist. "Well," she said, voice clipped, "I suppose they let anyone donate these days." "Apparently so," I said, meeting her eyes. "But some donors also know how to read architectural blueprints." That landed. I watched her eyes narrow, the line between her brows deepen. She didn't know what I meant, but she could tell I did. Juliet stepped closer. "Are you here to cause a scene?" she asked, her tone dropping lower. There was something in her eyes now, not fear, but uncertainty. Like a chess player realizing too late that a piece was already lost 5 moves ago. "No," I replied. "I'm here to support urban revitalization." And then I walked away. I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't need applause. All I needed was that moment, the one where they realized I wasn't just some uninvited guest crashing their glittering castle. I was the man they tried to bury, and I'd come back as the architect of their reckoning. Revenge isn't always rage and theatrics. Sometimes, it's careful calculation, sharpened in silence. A slow breath before the blow. The moment I stepped into that ballroom, I wasn't improvising. I wasn't reacting. I was executing a blueprint, one I'd been drafting the moment I discovered what Juliet had done. I'd been sipping coffee one morning in my office, an article open on my tablet, a headline boasting the Whitmore Foundation's innovative designs for a new affordable housing development. The render was clean, modern, efficient, and heartbreakingly familiar. I zoomed in on the structure, and my chest tightened. It was mine. Every line, every dimension. Even the sunsplit atrium that I had sketched years ago during a sleepless night on a mattress too thin to support resentment. I remembered that design. I remembered the way I had visualized natural light bringing hope to neglected neighborhoods. Now it was being credited to her. I spent the rest of that week digging. First out of disbelief, then out of necessity. Juliet hadn't just reused one blueprint. There were multiple, stamped under her brand, dressed up in her company's pastel colors. She had rebranded my work, erased my initials, and signed her name where mine had been. Worse, she'd used them to apply for federal tax credits. Claimed grants I didn't even know existed. And those signatures? Identical to mine. I knew because I'd spent enough nights watching the way my own hand moved over paper. I'd trained that signature into muscle memory. The flourish of the S, the slight upward curl of the X in Knox. It was mine. And yet there it was, forged flawlessly. I didn't scream. I didn't call. I didn't go online to post cryptic threats. I assembled a team. Digital forensics. Legal advisors. A retired IRS consultant who owed me a favor. I wanted evidence, undeniable, time-stamped, and airtight. And they delivered. A folder full of it. Blueprints dated and compared. Metadata proving the files originated from my old drives. logins tied to my accounts, IP addresses that trace back to devices registered in Juliet's name, even email correspondence where her assistant had referred to cleaning up Silas's watermarks. When I saw that line casual, dismissive, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. They didn't just try to erase me. They were still doing it. So I slipped every document into a slim black folder, tucked it inside the inner lining of my suit coat. It lay there like a heartbeat as I moved through the gala, smiling at donors, shaking hands, letting the illusion of civility stretch just a little longer. Because I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to beg for what was mine. I was here to reclaim it. I watched Juliet work the room with the confidence of a woman who'd never been told no. Her laugh was light, her posture elegant. Every smile she offered was precision-engineered for charm. The way she looked at each man was just slightly different, tailored to the balance of power between them. She had always been good at that. But now, she was walking across a floor laid with the very stones she stole. And I was the architect. I kept one eye on the stage. The charity program had Juliet listed as the keynote speaker, of course. Claudia had arranged it all, no doubt, presenting her daughter as the visionary, the philanthropist, the creative genius behind urban renewal. As the announcer introduced her, the crowd leaned in. Juliet took the stage, her silver gown shimmering beneath the lights. She gripped the microphone like it was her crown, and for a moment, she looked invincible. Tonight, she began, we celebrate the power of innovation, the transformation of neglected communities into thriving spaces, and the beauty of design with purpose. I stood near the back, sipping water, waiting. Her speech flowed like honey, perfectly rehearsed. She used all the right words. Legacy, sustainability, hope. She gestured to renderings behind her, smiling proudly as the crowd nodded and murmured their approval. They were clapping when she said, "These projects represent what the Whitmore Foundation stands for." And that's when I moved. I walked toward the stage as the lights dimmed slightly for the transition to the next speaker. I stepped onto the edge without waiting for permission. People turned. The silence gathered quickly, puzzled at first, then expectant. Juliet blinked at me, confused, annoyed. I took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady, "my name is Silas Knox Whitmore, co-founder of Clay and Knox Urban Designs." The pause after my name was thick with recognition. I'd like to take a moment to clarify something. Behind me, the projection screen came to life, controlled by a member of my team at the AV booth. Side-by-side images filled the screen. My original blueprints, next to Juliet's designs. Identical. Then came the documents, federal tax filings, forged signatures, IP logs. This work was stolen, I said clearly. These blueprints were created by me, used without my knowledge, profited from illegally, and that evidence has already been submitted to the IRS and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Gasps rippled. Cameras clicked. Claudia stood halfway out of her chair. Juliet's face went pale, paper white. Her lips parted, but no words followed. "I'm not here for revenge," I finished. "I'm here to reclaim my voice." Then I handed the mic to the stunned MC, turned, and walked off the stage as the silence boiled into noise. Some moments you can't plan for, no matter how meticulous your preparation. You think about the speech, the evidence, the fallout. But what you don't anticipate is the way silence stretches right before everything breaks. The way a room holds its breath. The way truth feels heavier than vengeance ever could. That was what I walked through when I stepped off that stage. Juliet was still frozen behind the mic stand, one manicured hand hanging midair like she'd forgotten what to do with it. Claudia was already rising to her feet, fumbling for composure with the grace of a woman who had never known the sting of public embarrassment. And the rest? A room full of money, status, and names that once ignored mine, all of them buzzing with confusion and curiosity. I didn't pause to watch it unfold. I didn't need to. My team had done their job perfectly. The slideshow behind me had clicked through each image like a trial unfolding before a jury. Blueprints I'd drawn, some from years ago, some never meant for public release, juxtaposed with Juliet's so-called innovations. The overlaps weren't subtle. They were damning. Then came the documents. Scanned copies of grant applications submitted in Juliet's name, using credentials that belonged to me. Signatures copied with such precision it would have been impressive if it hadn't been criminal. Screenshots of login timestamps from IP addresses tied to Juliet's devices. It wasn't just suspicious, it was prosecutable. And I had already submitted everything to the proper authorities before setting foot inside the event. No emotion, no desperation, just facts. Let them process that however they wanted. I moved through the crowd without a word. Faces turned, some stunned, some trying not to look like they were looking. Someone whispered my name, and I caught pieces of sentences trailing in my wake. Was that true? Those were his. That's the guy who... Security didn't stop me. They couldn't. I hadn't broken any laws. I was on the guest list, printed in bold, right above platinum-level contributor. I stepped outside into the night air. Cool, still, quieter than it should have been. My driver waited by the curb, holding the door open. I nodded once, climbed in, and let the door close behind me like the final period in a long overdue sentence. Inside the car, I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just sat with it. The end of one war doesn't mean peace. It just means the fire's changed direction. The next 48 hours felt like a controlled burn. It started with local news, an online article barely an hour after the gala, titled, "Whitmore Foundation Accused of Architectural Theft." No quotes, just speculation. Then the flood began. Morning shows picked it up. Architectural Digest issued a cautious statement about ongoing investigations. Business magazines scrambled to update profiles that previously lauded Juliet as a rising design star. Suddenly, I wasn't just the man she erased. I was the architect reclaiming a stolen legacy. Juliet posted a statement that afternoon. A polished photo of her sitting at her desk, a gentle smile, captioned with vague sincerity. There have been recent allegations that challenge the integrity of my work. I take them seriously and have begun a thorough internal review. Internal review. Like that would erase a decade of theft. Claudia went quiet. Completely. Not even a lawyered-up soundbite. Her name stopped appearing in the social columns. The woman who once hosted charity balls for sports suddenly disappeared into silence. And me? I didn't respond to interview requests. I didn't tweet, didn't gloat. I let the noise swirl around me while I remained still. Instead, I went to work. Not at Clay and Knox, my partners handled day-to-day operations while I focused on what came next. We launched Second Draft, a foundation for underrepresented architects and designers, focused on legal protections, IP education, and community mentorship. I've been planning it for months, but now the timing was perfect. We announced our board, 10 members, diverse, talented, resilient. Not a single Whitmore among them. My inbox overflowed. Messages from young designers, independent contractors, artists who had been bullied or stolen from or silenced. They wrote things like, "Thank you," and "Now I know I'm not crazy," and they tried to erase me too. That mattered more than any headline. I didn't set out to be a hero. I wasn't interested in the spotlight, but I did believe in justice, and in the right of every creator to claim their work. That week, Clay and Knox stock rose by 17%. Investors called. Partners doubled down. Meanwhile, Whitmore properties plummeted. Sponsors pulled out of future events. Boutique deals vanished. But I didn't lift a finger to destroy them. They did it to themselves. All I did was tell the truth. And now the world was finally listening. I expected fallout. I expected backlash. What I didn't expect was how quiet the collapse would be. The Whitmores had always been a noise-making machine. Parties, press releases, charity events covered in velvet and crystal. But after the gala, the silence was sudden, surgical. Like someone had yanked the plug from a life support machine and let their legacy go cold. The news cycle didn't care about discretion. It devoured everything. Headlines blared. Heiress accused of stealing architect's work. Whitmore designs under federal investigation. Justice for Silas Whitmore? That last one made me pause. Justice? I hadn't thought of it like that. I hadn't sought a courtroom verdict or a public apology. What I wanted was truth, returned to its rightful owner. What I needed was acknowledgement, if not from them, then from the world that once looked through me like I was made of glass. Within days, requests poured in. Podcasts, interviews, op-eds. Young architects wrote long messages filled with stories of betrayal and stolen dreams. Designers who'd been underpaid, overworked, ghost-ridden. People who knew what it meant to pour their soul into a project and watch someone else slap their name on it. I read every word. I didn't respond to every message, but I carried them with me. They became fuel. Proof that this fight was never just about blueprints or stolen credits. It was about every voice silenced for convenience. I didn't talk to Juliet. I didn't need to. Her silence online was loud enough. No apology, no denial, just a slowly vanishing presence from the design world she once ruled. Her company issued a bland statement about restructuring and internal reflection. They blamed a junior associate. I almost laughed when I read that, how quick they were to throw someone else under the bus, just like they had with me. But I didn't care who took the fall. I wasn't watching for punishment. I was watching for transformation. And that's when I knew it was time to launch the one thing I had built in the shadows, second draft. It had started as a scribble on a napkin during a red-eye flight. A half-formed idea I couldn't shake, a foundation dedicated to protecting independent designers. To give them tools I never had. Contracts written in their favor. Legal teams that didn't cost a year's rent. A place where creators could learn how to protect their work before someone else stole it. I used my own funds to launch it quietly, no fanfare, no champagne. Just a simple post on the Clay and Knox website with a mission statement that read, "Second chances belong to those who never had a first one." We staffed it with people who'd lived the story, independent artists, whistleblower attorneys, IP experts who'd fought copyright wars and won. Our board was intentionally built from the forgotten. First-gen architects, immigrants, women, and men who'd been undermined, overlooked, and still chose to keep building. Within a week, we had our first 100 applicants. Within 2, that number tripled. People wanted help. More than that, they wanted someone to believe them. And I did. Because I had once been the guy with sketches in his backpack and no one to fight for him. The man locked out of his own home, erased from his own legacy. I knew what that ache felt like. I knew how betrayal didn't just steal your work, it made you question whether you were ever good enough to begin with. So I made myself available. Quietly. No stages, no interviews. Just a man with an open door. One morning, I walked into the second draft office. Bare walls, minimal furniture, sunlight pouring in through bare windows, and found a handwritten letter on my desk. No return address. No email. Just a note in tight, anxious script. I was going to quit. I thought they won. But then I saw what you did. And now I'm sketching again. I sat with that note for a long time. That was the moment it hit me. This, not the revenge, not the fallout, not even the justice. This was the victory. That somewhere, someone picked up their pencil again. That someone who had nearly given up chose to stay in the fight. That was worth more than headlines or settlements or satisfaction. That was legacy. And in the silence that followed the storm, I could finally hear what mattered. It wasn't the applause. It was the quiet rustle of pages turning again, of creators sketching again, of voices rising, no longer asking permission to be seen. And I had helped build that, not from spite, but from blueprint. I hadn't planned to see her again. Not in person. Not like this. Weeks had passed since the gala. The headlines had cooled, the noise dialed down. Clay and Knox had signed 2 new contracts, one in Baltimore, the other in Portland. Second draft was steadily growing. I'd buried myself in purpose, kept my schedule packed enough that I wouldn't have to think about Juliet or Claudia or that fractured world I'd left behind. But fate has a sense of irony. It was a Saturday, early afternoon. I was speaking on a panel for a local civic design expo, nothing flashy, just community architects, students, and a few city planners gathered in a stuffy civic hall that smelled like old varnish and forgotten school projects. I liked it. No one here cared about designer labels or which foundation I'd embarrassed. They were builders of spaces of hope. I finished my talk on adaptive reuse and was browsing the student exhibits when I saw her. Juliet. She was standing near a display on sustainable mixed-use buildings, her hands folded awkwardly in front of her, her eyes scanning a blueprint that didn't belong to her. My breath caught, not from longing, not anymore, but from surprise. She looked different, smaller, not physically, but in presence. The shimmer, the untouchable glow she once wore like armor, was gone. Her hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, no diamonds at her ears, no entourage trailing behind her. Just her. Alone. For a moment, I wondered if she'd pretend not to see me. I turned to leave quietly, respectfully. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need to rehash anything. But then she looked up. Silas, she said. Not with venom. Not with ice. Just soft. Almost hesitant. I stopped, exhaled slowly, and turned to face her. Juliet. We stood there for a beat, strangers stitched together by memory. The silence between us wasn't tense. It was tired. Like 2 people who had run through the same storm from opposite sides of the street. She stepped toward me. You didn't return my message, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Which one? Her lips twitched, embarrassed. I sent you an email after the gala. I didn't expect a reply. But I needed to say something. I nodded but said nothing. There was nothing left in me that needed closure. I had already written my final chapter. She was a paragraph in the middle, important once, but no longer the ending. She shifted her weight. I came today to see the new talent, to remember what this used to feel like. Before it became a brand. I asked. I wasn't cruel, just honest. She winced, but didn't deny it. I got lost, she admitted. In the name. The expectations. My mother's voice in my head. She paused. I think somewhere along the way I stopped being a designer. I just became someone who managed impressions. I nodded again. I wasn't here to absolve her. That wasn't mine to give. I always envied the way you saw things, she said. Not just the buildings, but the people in them. The way you designed for someone, not around them. It was the closest she'd ever come to giving me credit. I studied her face, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the woman who locked me out of my own home. I saw someone older, humbled, a little broken maybe. The kind of broken that happens when the mirror cracks and no one is left to lie to you. I hope you find your way back to that version of yourself, I said. The one who used to dream out loud and sketch without fear. She swallowed, eyes shining. I'm trying. I gave her a nod. Nothing more. Nothing less. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. Not out of pride, but because I no longer needed anything from that moment. I'd already faced the ghost. And the strange thing? She didn't haunt me anymore. I walked past more booths, more hopeful designers explaining their ideas with the kind of enthusiasm that reminded me why I ever picked up a pencil in the first place. That's what stayed with me, not the past. The future. The people building in the shadows. The ones who hadn't been discovered, or erased, or crushed under legacy. They were the ones worth turning toward. And as I stepped out into the sunlight that afternoon, I felt it, lightness. The absence of weight I hadn't even known I was carrying until it was gone. That day didn't end in fanfare or confrontation. No apologies carved in stone. No final, cinematic goodbye. Just a man who kept walking. And a woman who finally understood why he had to. I wake up each morning with sunlight spilling through glass I designed myself. The house is perched just high enough above the city that I can see the skyline stretch like a promise in the distance, not a threat. This home wasn't bought, it was built. Every beam, every window, every line of its structure is something I drew with my own hand. It's quiet here. Not the emptiness of exile, but the peace that follows reclamation. There's something strange about surviving the storm and realizing you're still standing. You expect to feel triumphant, like every breath should be fireworks. But the truth is quieter. It's in the slow sip of coffee on a quiet patio. It's in the knowing glance at your reflection when you don't flinch anymore. It's in hearing your name said without pity or mockery. My name is on blueprints from coast to coast now. Clay and Knox Urban Designs is no longer just a firm, it's a movement. We don't just develop property, we build futures. Our designs prioritize dignity, beauty, and sustainability in places most developers overlook. And people have noticed. TED Talks, podcast interviews, university lectures. I've been asked to speak in rooms that once would have scoffed at my story. Not because I chased fame, but because the work made noise on its own. I've been called visionary, revolutionary, even brave. But I'm none of those things. I'm just someone who told the truth and refused to back down when it made people uncomfortable. I never needed to destroy the Whitmores. They did that themselves. Their empire was made of polished lies and borrowed brilliance. All I did was hold up a mirror. Let the world see what had always been there. Juliet disappeared from the spotlight. Her boutique chain folded under the weight of lawsuits and public distrust. Claudia sold off 2 properties and withdrew from the board of 3 foundations. Gregory relocated to Europe under the pretense of expanding international investments. No public apologies. No confessions. Just a slow, silent crumbling. I didn't gloat. Because by then, I had already moved on. Second Draft has become more than I ever imagined. We've protected dozens of small designers from IP theft. We've helped artists patent their work, trained them to negotiate fair contracts, even funded scholarships for first-gen architecture students. The stories that come through our doors now? They remind me why I ever picked up a pencil. They remind me of the boy sketching buildings in the back of a public school classroom, dreaming of homes that didn't leak and streets that didn't trap you in. That boy would have been proud of the man I've become. There are still hard days. Moments when I look at an old design Juliet once claimed and feel the sting of betrayal all over again. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they'd never locked me out. If they treated me like family instead of charity, would I have stayed? Would I have settled? Maybe. And that's the scariest thought of all. Because in their attempt to erase me, they freed me. Freed me to become something they never would have allowed. freed me to outgrow the version of myself who needed their approval, freed me to build without begging for permission. I don't wear vengeance anymore. It served its purpose, but it's too heavy to carry forever. These days, I wear purpose, peace, progress, and a quiet kind of pride that doesn't need to shout. Every now and then, I get letters from people who say I inspired them. They thank me for being loud in a world that wanted them to stay quiet. They think I'm brave, but I tell them the truth. Bravery isn't about confrontation. It's about endurance. It's about standing up when the world insists you sit down. It's about drawing one more line when they try to steal the page. And now, as I sit at the drafting table by my window, pen in hand, fresh sketchpad open, I understand what legacy really is. It's not about fame. It's not about being remembered by name. It's about what you leave behind for those who come after. It's about blueprints no one can steal, no matter how hard they try. Because the truth is fire. And when it finally catches, it doesn't ask permission. It just burns away the lies until only what's real remains. That's what they could never take from me. And that's what I'll keep building from. One honest line at a time. It was supposed to be a celebration. That's how they pitched it anyway. A soft spring evening at the Grantwood estate. Trimmed hedges and lantern-lit paths, champagne on silver trays, Noelle's name scripted on everything from napkins to menus like she was royalty. And in a way, she was, the daughter of Clarissa Grant, heiress of charm and venom, and me, the man history had rewritten as an embarrassing footnote. I knew the moment I stepped onto the estate grounds that I didn't belong. I could feel it in the way the valet took my keys like he was doing me a favor, in the way heads turned, but no one made room. It wasn't my world anymore. Maybe it never was. But I came. For Noelle. She had texted the day before, brief, almost reluctant. I know it's awkward, but you can come. Just keep things peaceful, please. I didn't ask what that meant. I just showed up, clean shave, dark blazer, the same cologne I wore the day she was born. I stood near the edge of the lawn by the hedges, holding a flute of something dry and expensive I barely sipped. Noelle had looked beautiful, radiant. Her smile was quick, nervous. When she saw me, it softened just for a moment. That was enough. Then came the moment. I'd made the mistake of moving toward the garden archway to take a photo of the string lights when I saw her, Clarissa, my ex-wife. Still as impeccably groomed and emotionally frigid as the day she told me I didn't fit the narrative anymore. She had a way of entering a room like a curtain of perfume and frost. Her heels struck the cobblestone like gavel hits. She'd spotted me from across the lawn and made a beeline, drink in one hand, and her mother's silver bracelet glittering on the other. I didn't brace myself. I should have. You don't get to loiter around like a proud father, she hissed as she reached me, voice low but sharp. You're not my husband anymore. I'm Noelle's father, I said calmly. That hasn't changed. Clarissa's eyes narrowed like a lens focusing for a kill shot. And then she raised her voice. You're not my husband anymore. She barked loud enough to halt the string quartet mid-song. Heads turned. Some gasped. Some whispered. Some smiled. And then she shoved me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe she'd had just enough to drink. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. Either way, I lost my footing. The marble edge of the fountain was slick beneath my loafers. My arms windmilled. I tried to steady myself on the wrought iron rim, but it was too late. I plunged in backward, arms flailing, spine slapping the water with a splash loud enough to echo across the lawn. Cold, chlorinated water swallowed me whole for a moment before I bobbed back up, soaked and stunned, like a washed-up extra from a bad sitcom. The silence broke quickly. Gasps turned to laughter. Laughter turned to applause. I heard someone say, "He's lucky we even let him in." I sat there, water dripping down my face, my shirt plastered to my chest, blazer floating like a sad cape around me. Somewhere, a waiter whispered, "Should I help him out?" And someone else snorted, "Let him marinate." And that's when I smiled. I didn't stand. I didn't flail. I just sat up straight in the water, my arms resting on the edge of the fountain like a man enjoying a casual soak. I looked at Clarissa, mascara perfectly intact, rage blooming in her chest like wildfire. I looked past her, too, at Noelle, who stood frozen in her pale yellow dress, jaw slack, a champagne flute trembling in her hand. At Dominic, her fiancé, awkwardly trying to decide if he should step in. At Clarissa's father, Judge Conrad Grant, who watched me with the same bored contempt he wore at our divorce hearing. Then I said just one thing. Clear. Calm. Almost casual. Remember this moment. The laughter died fast. Not all at once, but like a candle guttering out in a draft. Some chuckles lingered, unsure of themselves. A few guests looked away. Clarissa opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Maybe it was the smile. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the way I didn't scream, didn't rage, didn't crawl. Just sat there. Dignified. Dangerous. A waiter finally moved, offering me a hand. I took it. My shoes squished as I stepped out of the water, droplets falling like punctuation marks around me. I peeled off my blazer and laid it neatly over a nearby chair. Someone tried to offer me a towel. I waved it off. I walked past Clarissa without a glance, water dripping down my slacks and into her carefully manicured grass. She flinched, just slightly, as though my wet presence might stain her air. I walked back to my post near the hedges and picked up my barely touched champagne flute. And I waited. They had no idea what was coming. They thought the fountain was the punchline, the peak of humiliation. But for me, it was only the start. The fountain didn't break me. It baptized me. The wet blazer still clung to my skin like a second insult. I'd refused the towel they offered, not out of pride, but because I didn't want anything from them. The laughs had faded. The whispers had turned. I stood at the edge of the lawn, watching them pretend I wasn't there, as if I could be erased with enough champagne and piano music. Clarissa had disappeared back into the tent, probably to spin a version of the fountain story that made her the victim. That was her way, always the fragile heroine in her own theater of cruelty. But I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to demand anything, because I hadn't come here to win their approval. I had come to deliver the answer to a question they hadn't dared ask. What happens when the man you discarded stops playing along? The first sign was the silence. It rolled in slow, like fog on a battlefield. Guests stopped mid-sentence, turning toward the gates. Even the musicians, unsure whether they should resume playing or remain frozen in awkward anticipation, turned their heads. The estate gates creaked open. You could hear it all the way across the lawn, an old, groaning metal song that echoed through the manicured hedges and clipped perfection of the Grantwood property. Everyone's heads turned, eyes narrowing toward the source like curious deer sensing a predator nearby. And then the car appeared. Not just any car. A black Mercedes Maybach, long and low to the ground, its polished frame gleaming beneath the string lights like it had been born from shadow and wax. Behind it, two more dark vehicles, quiet, seamless, in sync. Not limos. Not hired Ubers. These weren't for show. They were for precision. The kind of arrival that doesn't announce itself with noise, but with power. Clarissa emerged from the tent just in time to see the back door of the lead car swing open. And out stepped Corindre, sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. Three-piece charcoal gray suit, marbled cufflinks, and that expression he always wore. Like he'd already read every move you were going to make and decided it wasn't worth blinking for. Corin wasn't just my lawyer. He was my scalpel, my sword, my silence weaponized. People turned to each other, asking in hushed tones who he was. You could hear the ripple. That's Corindre. Wait, is that the Corindre? He's the guy who handled that offshore property case in Geneva. No. That's the guy who got that pharmaceutical CEO out of a billion-dollar fraud trial. What's he doing here? Corin didn't acknowledge them. His eyes were on me. Calm, cool, focused. Then the rear door of the second car opened. Tessa Quill stepped out like she was walking into a boardroom she already owned. All black, hair swept into a loose knot, her heels clicking softly on the estate's gravel path. She didn't smile. Tessa never smiled when she worked. She was half business advisor, half investigator, and fully uninterested in anyone's opinion. She nodded once at me before walking up beside Corin. That was the moment the laughter died for good. Clarissa's smirk evaporated. Her hand tightened around the flute she was holding. She turned to her father, the old judge, as if to ask what he knew. He looked just as confused. Good. Because they were about to understand just how far behind they'd fallen. Corin approached me first. He didn't comment on my soaked shirt or my dripping shoes. He simply handed me a fresh navy blazer, pressed and folded, with a silk pocket square in the exact shade of La Crest blue. It wasn't just a change of clothes. It was a reminder. I was never out of moves. Corin turned toward the crowd. No microphone. No raised voice. He didn't need one. The hush was so complete. He could have whispered, and they still would have heard every syllable. Mr. Locke has a few documents to present, Corin said, his voice calm and rich, like velvet hiding a blade. You could feel the pulse of panic skip through the crowd. People shifted, murmured. A few looked to Clarissa. She was frozen. Tessa stepped forward, opening a leather-bound folder. She held it against one arm like a judge presenting evidence. Her eyes scanned the lawn, stopping briefly on Clarissa, then Mason, Clarissa's brother, and finally the judge. She didn't blink. "We'll be brief," she said, tone clipped and precise, but thorough. Clarissa stepped forward, her heels stabbing the grass. "This is a private event. You don't have the right to." Corin held up a hand. "Please don't interrupt. You're still in possession of company property and pending assets. That makes this very much our business." My former in-laws looked like a jury being caught with evidence in their pockets. Noelle had moved closer to Dominic, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Her eyes flicked between her mother and me, something flickering in them I hadn't seen in years, curiosity. Maybe even something like hope. Clarissa scoffed, trying to regain her footing. "This is a stunt. An embarrassment." "No," I said quietly, stepping forward, wearing the fresh blazer like armor. "That was the fountain. This is something else." Corin reached into the folder and withdrew the first envelope. "Legal notifications," he said. "Filed, stamped, and served." No one moved. Tessa added, "This isn't a party anymore." And that was the moment it shifted. The laughter didn't return. The derision didn't flare up again. People stopped seeing me as the man who fell into a fountain and started seeing me as something else, something they hadn't accounted for. Clarissa's expression didn't change, but her hand trembled slightly. Just enough. That was enough for me, because they thought the fall was the end, but it was just the start of their descent. Clarissa was still reeling. I could see it in the way her nostrils flared, in how she kept glancing toward her father like she needed him to regain control of a room she thought belonged to her. She always thrived on theatrics, her voice, her wardrobe, her timing. But this wasn't her stage anymore, and she was beginning to feel it. Corin turned toward her, calm as ever, and handed her a sealed manila envelope. The kind of envelope that smells like law offices and ruined legacies. He didn't say much, just enough. "Official notification," he said, his voice steady, barely raised. Clarissa took the envelope with 2 fingers, like it might be contaminated. "What is this?" "Your future," Corin said. "Or what's left of it." I watched her tear it open. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and I could see the way her posture changed, rigid spine, shoulders angling defensively. She was bracing for impact, but the blow was already in motion. "Effective immediately," Corin continued, "you are no longer the majority owner of Lockcrest Media." She looked up slowly, her face blank, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. "You're bluffing." "I don't bluff," Corin replied, folding his hands neatly in front of him. "We spent the past 18 months acquiring controlling interests through holding entities and private shareholders. All legal. All documented." She blinked hard. "Impossible. I would have known." "No," I said quietly, stepping forward. "You wouldn't have. Because you weren't looking. You were too busy painting me as obsolete to notice the foundation shifting beneath you." Clarissa's gaze snapped to me, fury blooming in her cheeks. "You think you can just waltz back in and take what I built?" "I'm not taking anything," I said. "I'm reclaiming what was always mine. The difference is, I didn't need a headline to do it." Behind her, Mason approached, her brother, the eternal yes-man. He tried to snatch the documents from her hand, but Corin blocked him with a single, subtle step. Tessa moved in too, her presence quiet but unmistakable. "You're going to regret this," Mason hissed, glaring at me like a schoolyard bully unprepared for someone who studied law and revenge in equal measure. "Regret?" I asked. "No, I already did that. I regretted giving you all the benefit of the doubt. I regretted letting my name get buried in your narrative. I regretted thinking loyalty was louder than ambition. But now, I don't feel a thing." Clarissa tried to laugh. It came out brittle, hollow. "You're trying to embarrass me in front of Noelle. That's all this is." I turned slowly to face my daughter, who stood a few feet away in her pale yellow dress. Her expression caught somewhere between shock and awe. "Noelle," I said, "this isn't about embarrassing anyone. It's about truth. You deserve to know what's really going on in this family. What's been hidden behind curated images and press statements." She didn't respond. "Not yet." But she didn't look away either. Clarissa finally barked. This doesn't change anything. But that's where she was wrong. It changed everything. 2 years ago, I was living in a rented apartment off Arbor Lane with a broken credit score and a box of court papers that felt like a coffin. Clarissa had taken the house, the cars, the public sympathy, and worst of all, my daughter's distance. People said I should move on, find peace, write a memoir, and let the dust settle. But I don't believe in letting anything settle that was built on lies. So I rebuilt. Quietly. Carefully. While they laughed at the idea of me consulting for boutique firms, I bought into them. When they said I'd never touch Lockcrest again, I started acquiring small shares through offshore proxies. A trust in Cyprus. A holding firm in the Caymans. A shell company based out of Luxembourg. They were puzzles only someone like Corin could assemble, and he did. Tessa came later. A former corporate auditor with an intuition for deceit. She found the gaps in Clarissa's paperwork. The unreported bonuses. The irregular deposits. She traced every dollar Clarissa moved to keep her socialite status intact, including the ones she used to fund this very party. I didn't need to crash the engagement party. I owned the rights to the tablecloths and the marquee, and now everyone here knew it. Mason tried again, louder this time. This is fraud. You orchestrated this behind our backs. Corin tilted his head. No. What you're describing is called strategy. What Clarissa did with company funds. That's fraud. Clarissa stiffened. Watch what you say, or I'll sue. Tessa pulled another document from the folder. You might want to read this before you get litigious. Clarissa snatched it and scanned the lines. I saw the moment the blood drained from her face. Corin leaned in slightly, his voice low. That's the internal audit you never thought anyone would authorize. It shows how you funneled over $600,000 into non-business accounts for personal use. Engagement party included. You can't prove that. Oh, we can, Tessa said. Your name is on every transfer. And we have the emails. The murmurs in the crowd surged again, louder this time. Guests looked at each other like they were finally realizing the evening wasn't about candlelight and romance anymore. It was a corporate earthquake dressed in formal wear. Clarissa opened her mouth. Closed it. She looked at her father again. The judge. The man who had backed her through every dirty move. But even he couldn't stop this. He just sat there, jaw clenched, the weight of reputation finally pressing down on him. You thought the divorce gave you control, I said, my voice calm, low. It gave you what you asked for, but not what was underneath. Clarissa stepped back. Just one step. But it was all I needed. That was the step of someone who realized they weren't the hunter anymore. They were the hunted. They didn't know who I was anymore. But to be fair, they never really did. Standing there, surrounded by half-frozen champagne flutes and whispers that now carried a sharper edge, I felt more grounded than I had in years. Clarissa's face, twisted with disbelief, was the same face I'd once watched laugh in court as the judge handed her most of our assets. Her family had always treated me like the outsider, presentable enough for holidays, just charming enough for public photos, but never worthy of a seat at their true table. Not the decision-making table. Not the legacy table. And I'd accepted that, once. The weight of being less than draped over me like a suit that never quite fit. But all of that was before the fall. Not the fountain. The real fall. The divorce. The financial scorched earth policy they called a settlement. The day I left my own house with nothing but my name and a black duffel bag. That was the moment I stopped playing their game and started building my own. 5 years ago, I stood at the threshold of a one-bedroom apartment with no heat and peeling paint, holding that duffel bag like it still meant I had something to offer the world. I slept on a futon for 2 years, never once complaining, not even when the winter air bit through the cracks in the window frame. I didn't have much, but I had clarity, and time, and something far more dangerous than rage. Silence. Silence lets you observe. Silence lets you build. I started small consulting gigs for struggling businesses, strategy calls for up-and-coming tech firms too green to know their own worth. Most paid me in equity, some in late checks and handshake promises. I kept all the receipts, every slide deck I made, every dollar I reinvested. I watched companies fail and grow. I learned what made people desperate. I learned what made people reckless. And I took notes on everyone. It started with one shell company, then 3, then a portfolio of 12 silent partnerships, all layered beneath Lock Strategic Holdings, a name I chose deliberately. I wanted it to sound like a legacy, and maybe because it was, just not the one they expected. While Clarissa held her galas and recited carefully crafted interviews about weathering her past, I was buying into boardrooms quietly, legally, and methodically. The key wasn't revenge. It was anonymity. Every acquisition was a chess move. Every fund a pressure point. I wasn't chasing her. I was moving right under her, laying the groundwork for the kind of coup that never made headlines until it was already done. I still remember the day I bought the first batch of Lockcrest Media shares. Only 2% through a proxy firm in Dublin. Barely a whisper. But that was the crack in the dam. Over the next 18 months, I used every contact I had. Former partners, disillusioned shareholders, quiet dissenters in the company Clarissa thought she owned. Some of them sold just to spite her. Others had no idea who they were really selling to. It didn't matter. Piece by piece, I reclaimed what she never deserved. Corin found the final key. An overlooked clause in the post-divorce business division. Contract that Clarissa's lawyers never read closely enough. It allowed for restructuring if controlling interest changed hands. A clause that had sat dormant until I hit 51%. And then 62%. That was 72 hours ago. The morning I crossed the threshold, I stood in my office, a minimalist floor in a downtown high-rise, the walls lined with glass, not portraits. I wasn't interested in showcasing what I'd built. I was interested in what was still left to take. Tessa was already there, tablet in hand, coffee steaming beside her. "It's time," she'd said without looking up. "Everything filed?" I asked. She nodded. "Filed, timestamped, secured. The transfer emails went out an hour ago. Board notices are on their desks." Corin had stepped in a moment later, a thick folder in hand. "Shall we save the date?" I didn't smile. I just said, "Noelle's engagement party. They won't expect it." There had been a brief pause. Long enough for Tessa to glance up, her expression unreadable. "You're sure?" she asked. "Absolutely. Because I didn't want a press conference. I didn't want a boardroom coup. I wanted a garden filled with champagne and artifice. I wanted the same curated elegance they had always used to make me feel small. And I wanted to reclaim it, not with a bang, but with a signature. Now, standing under the same string lights they once toasted under without me, I wasn't thinking about humiliation. I wasn't thinking about the fountain or the gasp of guests. I was thinking about the woman who once told me I was lucky to be married to her. The woman who told me, "You're not built for empire." The woman who now stood shaking with an envelope in her hand, while the empire around her cracked beneath the weight of its own ego. They didn't know who I was anymore, but they were learning. Every whispered conversation. Every side-eye from a guest trying to gauge which side of history to stand on. Every dry mouth swallowing regret. Clarissa wasn't used to being outplayed. She didn't know how to handle it. She moved like a cornered animal, nostrils flaring, smile plastered over panic, trying to spin a new reality faster than the old one fell apart. "None of this changes what people think of you," she hissed when she finally reached me again. "You're still the man I left." "No," I said, quietly. "I'm the man you didn't see coming." She opened her mouth to retort, but I stepped around her, leaving only the scent of ink and precision in my wake. I looked up and met Noelle's eyes. She was watching, really watching. The kind of look that strips years off memory and makes you hope. I didn't wave. I didn't explain. I just nodded once and walked back to where Corin and Tessa stood waiting. Because foundations don't need applause. They just need to hold until everything else collapses. The scent of jasmine and wine lingered in the air, clinging to the tension that now stretched across the lawn like a taut wire. Moments ago, the guests had been raising toasts, posing under fairy lights, clinking glasses over shrimp canapes. Now, they stood in uncertain clusters, champagne half-lifted, conversations paused mid-sentence, faces turned toward me in the small storm I brought with me. I stepped forward, the soft squish of my damp shoes meeting the manicured grass the only sound in the brief hush. I wasn't just reclaiming space. I was shifting the axis of the entire evening. I looked directly at the string quartet, whose instruments still rested awkwardly in their laps after Clarissa's earlier outburst. "You can stop playing," I said flatly. "This engagement party is being recorded." Some guests laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Clarissa didn't. She snapped her head toward me, expression twisted with disbelief. "You're insane. This is harassment." Then Corin stepped up beside me, holding a tri-folded document with a gold seal and a judge's stamp. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately. No flourish. Just weight. Legitimacy. Finality. "This," he said, holding it high enough for Clarissa and her father to see, is a court-approved authorization for emergency shareholder disclosures in a setting involving disputed corporate assets. What the hell does that mean? Mason spat, eyes darting to his father, who now stood ramrod straight with a face carved from courtroom marble. Corin continued, tone like a scalpel. It means this isn't a party anymore. It's an emergency shareholder meeting. And this property, he gestured around us, to the elegant tent, the rented stage, the manicured garden with its tailored hedges, was paid for in part by misappropriated corporate funds belonging to Loch Crest Media. Which means this estate is now under formal dispute. Gasps. Murmurs. A glass shattered somewhere behind me. Clarissa's eyes blazed. This is a celebration for our daughter, not some circus for your ego. I stepped closer to her, calm, unblinking. You made it a circus when you paid for it with money that didn't belong to you. You just assumed no one would ever trace it. Clarissa turned to her father. Dad, say something. Judge Conrad Grant looked down at the document, reading the highlighted sections, scanning the signatures. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. And that silence? It was louder than any verdict he'd ever given from the bench. Mason pushed forward. You're just bitter because you lost the divorce. You're jealous. This is just performance. No, I replied. This is accountability. You all thought you could gut me in court, parade me out of my own life, and dance on the ashes. I let you write me off as irrelevant. And while you laughed and misused company funds to inflate your image, I rebuilt. You used Loch Crest as your personal piggy bank. And I took it back piece by piece, quietly, legally. Now we're here. This isn't personal. It's business. Tessa joined us then, holding up her tablet. Would you like me to begin the disclosure summary? Clarissa shouted. This is still my daughter's engagement party. Tessa looked at her, completely unshaken. That's unfortunate. Because according to the financial logs you authorized, this party is listed under a board-approved public relations initiative. Which means it's company property. Which means it's our concern. Dominic, Noelle's fiancé, stepped forward from the crowd. His tie was slightly loosened, his hands in his pockets like he was balancing anger and uncertainty. Is this actually legal? Corin turned to him, expression neutral. Absolutely. And your presence here as a potential beneficiary of Loch Crest's standing makes you a relevant party under the shareholder ethics code. Noelle's hand found Dominic's arm. He's not attacking us, she said quietly. He's fixing something. Clarissa lunged toward her. Don't you dare take his side. But Noelle stepped back. Your side isn't what I thought it was. The air shifted again. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I wasn't just a soaked man in a blazer anymore. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. Corin took a few steps toward the crowd. To clarify for all guests present, this disclosure will not involve names that aren't on record, and it will not involve any statements that haven't been court-cleared. We're simply here to inform relevant parties of discrepancies that affect company assets and legal ownership. You're free to leave, but if you choose to stay, you are now observers in an active shareholder deposition. I turned slowly and addressed the room, not with anger, but with clarity. For years, I was painted as the one who failed, who walked away. But I didn't walk. I was pushed out of my marriage, out of the boardroom I helped build, out of my daughter's life. And I took it. I wore it. But I didn't disappear. I turned toward Clarissa, who now looked pale. She still had her arms crossed, still wearing that mask of defiance, but her eyes were flickering, searching for a foothold that no longer existed. This moment, I said, isn't about revenge. It's about record and transparency. Two things this family has long avoided. Corin nodded. Shall we proceed? I glanced once toward Noelle. Her expression wasn't just surprise anymore. It was something deeper. Maybe recognition. Maybe regret. Yes, I said. Let's begin. Tessa connected the tablet to a portable monitor set up near the tent's entrance. Likely originally intended for a slideshow of Noelle's childhood photos. Instead, it now displayed a spreadsheet. Columns, line items, transfer histories, account numbers. And with each new transaction revealed, the narrative cracked. Clarissa tried once more to interject, her voice shaking this time. This is still my daughter's party, but Judge Grant finally spoke. Clarissa, stop. She froze. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even look at her. But in those 3 words, the entire estate trembled. Because the law, her lifelong shield, was no longer on her side. She wasn't the judge's daughter anymore. She was just another defendant. I stood beneath the lanterns that had once lit laughter and toasts, but now illuminated nothing but exposed truth. Clarissa's face had gone pale, her jaw clenched so tight I wondered if she could even hear the sound of her empire crumbling around her. She was still trying to recover control, to wrestle the evening back into the polished fantasy she'd crafted for so long. But it was too late. I stepped up onto the small riser meant for the engagement speeches. My dress shoes, still damp from the fountain, left faint marks on the polished wood. The microphone waited on its silver stand, intended for Clarissa's father to bless the union, for Noel to say a few tearful words, for toasts and camera flashes and declarations of eternal joy. Instead, I reached for it. The murmurs dropped to a hush again. This time, there was no confusion in their silence. Just anticipation. A strange hunger. People love watching power shift, especially when it doesn't belong to them. I tapped the mic once, let the brief feedback sting the air, and then looked directly at my daughter. "Noelle," I said softly, but clearly, "I'm sorry this isn't the engagement party you imagined. I know what it was supposed to be. A celebration of love, family, a future." She stood a few feet from the tent, Dominic at her side, her hand curled lightly around his forearm. Her eyes, deep brown like mine, held everything. Conflict, uncertainty, and something else. Stillness. I turned to the rest of the guests. But if we're going to talk about a future, then we need to start with the truth. No smoke. No mirrors. I let that settle before shifting my gaze. I found Dominic in the crowd, his stance square, his expression guarded. His father stood beside him, lean, salt-haired, with the cautious posture of a man trying to decide if he was watching an implosion or an opening act. I locked eyes with Dominic. "Do your parents know," I asked, "how this family has treated me? The man who raised Noel? The man who showed up for recitals, birthday parties, every scraped knee and science fair, even after I was dragged out of my own home." Dominic didn't blink. "They do now." His voice didn't carry anger, just understanding. A quiet kind of allegiance I didn't expect, but appreciated. Clarissa surged forward, heels striking the stone like war drums. "This is not the time for this. You're humiliating yourself." I turned to her calmly. "Clarissa, this stopped being about me the moment you used company funds to manufacture this illusion. You turned a family milestone into a PR stunt. You invited everyone except the truth. You're using our daughter's engagement to air your grievances." I cut her off. Not with volume, but with finality. "No, I'm using this moment to reclaim what was stolen. My voice, my integrity, my place in a family that tried to erase me." I looked back to Dominic. "I'm not here to undermine your engagement. I'm here to make sure the man marrying my daughter sees clearly. That you know what stands behind the curtain. Not just the curated photos and the floral arrangements, but the rod in the foundation." His mother, elegant, wearing a sapphire dress and pearls, stepped forward gently. "We'd heard things," she said, "but we assumed they were exaggerated." Clarissa's family presented a very different picture. I nodded. They always did. And I let them. For years, I stayed silent for Noelle's sake. I let them distort who I was because I believed one day she'd come looking for the truth on her own. Clarissa tried again to grab the mic, but Tessa stepped forward just in time. Her hand didn't need to touch Clarissa, just hovered in warning. That was enough. Clarissa stepped back like she'd been slapped. I turned to my daughter. "Noelle, I wasn't the perfect husband, but I was always your father. And when I lost everything, when your mother painted me as an afterthought, I never stopped showing up for you, even when I had to stand in the shadows of my own life." She was crying now. Not sobbing. Not dramatic. Just quiet tears, like something long buried was breaking open inside her. I held the mic in one hand and opened my other palm toward her. "You don't owe me anything. I didn't do this tonight to win you over. I did it to stop lying by omission. Because silence can protect a child, but it can also suffocate the truth." Clarissa tried to speak again. "She doesn't want your guilt trip," Dominic interrupted her. "Clarissa, enough." The words stunned her into silence. Dominic stepped forward, his hand dropping from Noelle's. This day was about celebrating Noelle and building something honest together. But if you're telling me the people around her have built their lives on manipulation, then I want to know. I need to know. I nodded at him. "Then you're already a better man than I was at your age." That made him pause, then nod. Clarissa's father stepped toward the stage, his face rigid with disapproval. "This isn't the forum for this." "It's the exact forum," I replied. Because this party was never just a celebration. It was a performance, one paid for with stolen funds, draped in false smiles, and hosted by a family who forgot that the truth doesn't need an invitation. Judge Grant didn't reply. He turned and walked off, slowly, as though a lifetime of control had finally rusted through. I stepped down from the riser. Noelle met me halfway. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her arms around me like it was instinct. Like the years of distance between us collapsed into this single, quiet moment. "You didn't ruin the party," she whispered. "You saved the story." Behind us, the lights flickered. The music hadn't returned. The guests hadn't resumed their clinking glasses. They were watching something they never thought they'd see. A man they once laughed at, standing calm in the eye of the storm with the truth finally on his side. And the real father-in-law finally acknowledged. It didn't take long. By morning, the headlines had already surfaced. Local outlets, then regional. By noon, it had gone national. A photo of me, drenched in water, hair slicked back, standing calmly at the edge of the marble fountain with my hands resting on the stone like I belonged there. Because I did. A frozen moment in time that once would have been the punchline of the week. But now, attached to the words shareholder coup and corporate fraud probe, it became something else entirely. Powerful. The internet loves a fall, but it loves a resurrection even more. The first article titled it, "The Fountain Fall Heard Around the Boardroom." Another called it, "From Soaked to Sovereign." One of my favorites, Clarissa Grant's party crashes itself. But it wasn't just the photo or the drama that caught fire. It was the truth that followed. The documents, the footage, the audit. And it was all real. We hadn't edited anything. We hadn't needed to. The numbers spoke loud enough. Tessa's forensic trail, paired with Corin's precision in legal framing, laid bare what the Grant family had hidden behind their manicured brand for years. Clarissa's misuse of Lockcrest Media funds was no longer speculation, it was itemized fact. Dozens of expense reports masked as community engagement or employee development that turned out to be personal luxuries. Spa weekends, estate renovations, designer contracts for Noelle's engagement party that were, embarrassingly, run through a company wellness budget. It was one thing to misappropriate funds. It was another to do it with such arrogance. Corin filed the hearing request by 9 a.m. sharp. I didn't even have to be there in person. He preferred it that way. "Let the optics speak," he told me. "You've already done the part that matters." So, I sat in my office downtown, sunlight slicing through the blinds like gold bars on the floor, and watched the live stream like a man watching history course-correct itself. Clarissa tried to speak at first. Always the orator, always sure the room belonged to her. But the hearing was tight, controlled. Every time she raised her voice or tried to inject emotion, the chairwoman interrupted with, "We'll get to that. Please stay with the facts." And the facts gutted her. Tessa walked the board through the timeline. Receipts, bank transfers, even metadata from PDF edits. Everything connected. Each expense Clarissa had filed under the company ledger came with an annotated counterpart, proof of where the money actually went. The engagement party's garden rental? Paid through the Lockcrest Wellness and Cultural Enrichment Division. The crystal chandeliers strung above the tent? Filed as conference lighting. Even the champagne tower had been labeled as client entertainment. By the time the third slide came up on screen, the room had gone still. Not just the board. Not just the Grant family's internal counsel. But the entire live stream audience watching it unfold like a corporate Greek tragedy. Clarissa broke somewhere near the 45-minute mark. "You people have no idea the pressure I'm under," she snapped. "Do you think it's easy preserving the image of a family falling apart?" Tessa didn't flinch. "That may be true, but you don't get to preserve an image with money that wasn't yours." Clarissa looked to her brother. Mason wouldn't meet her eyes. She looked to her father. He stared ahead, unmoving. For the first time, she stood alone, not just in name, but in consequence. And I didn't need to say a word. Because the silence was finally working for me. They showed the fountain video next. Not just the viral clip from a guest's phone, but the footage from Tessa's discreet camera. A wide angle. Clear audio. Clarissa shouting. The shove. The splash. The laughter. The gasps. Then my voice, echoing in the stillness, "Remember this moment." It echoed again in the courtroom replay like a prophecy. I saw it all from my office. I watched as the story they thought would humiliate me became the one that unraveled them. And I didn't smile. I just sat still, feeling the weight of it all. Not joy, not revenge, but a quiet kind of justice that doesn't ask for applause. By late afternoon, the board voted to suspend Clarissa pending full investigation. She tried to argue, to pivot, to reframe. But the gavel came down, figuratively and literally, and it was done. Clarissa Grant, the woman who once kicked me out of a boardroom with a condescending wave of her hand, was now under investigation by a board she no longer controlled. The PR fallout was fast and brutal. Lockcrest's social media page disabled comments within hours. Sponsors pulled their banners from the homepage. News anchors who once fawned over Clarissa's philanthropic galas now replayed the fountain video with slow-motion captions. Even the judge, her father, came under scrutiny. His signature had authorized several discretionary spending reports. Corin made sure to reference them subtly in the hearing. Just enough to raise eyebrows. Just enough to make the old man sweat. And through it all, I said nothing. Because I didn't need to anymore. That evening, I got a call. Not from Clarissa. Not from Mason. But from Noelle. She didn't speak at first. I could hear wind, maybe from a balcony or a park bench. Then, her voice. Dad? That word, simple and soft, did more to shake me than any verdict. I'm here, I said. I saw everything, she whispered. I didn't know it was that bad. It's okay, I said. You weren't supposed to know. They made sure of that. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. Or see it. She paused. I guess I believed what they told me. That's what they wanted. Another pause. Is it too late to start over? I closed my eyes. No, I said. It's exactly the right time. I didn't need headlines. I didn't need the boardroom cheers or the shifting alliances. I just needed that. Because in the end, the public reckoning wasn't just about Clarissa. It was about me, finally being seen, not as the man who fell, but as the one who stood, quietly, while the world caught up. The hearing concluded, but its tremors were only beginning to ripple through the walls of Lockcrest media, and through the hearts of the people who once ruled it like a fiefdom. I didn't rush. I didn't gloat. Instead, I moved with precision. Every step, every decision, was calculated, not for vengeance, but to restore what had been quietly dismantled in my name. 3 days after the board's suspension vote, I stood in the glass conference room on the 37th floor of the Locke Strategic Holdings building, downtown. The room was bright, sun spilling across the long oak table, and at the far end sat Corin, flipping through a set of documents that would change the company's course. Tessa was beside him, expression sharp, tablet in hand, a digital trail of signatures and acquisitions lighting her screen. This is the final set, Corin said, sliding a leather folder toward me. You sign this, and it's done. 62%. Full executive control reinstated under your name. I paused, fingertips grazing the leather. The folder was heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. This was the moment. Not the moment of spectacle, not the party, or the hearing, or the social media chaos, but the quiet, personal shift that no one could take from me. Ownership. Real. Legal. Earned. I opened the folder and scanned the page. My name, printed clearly beneath the company seal, Graham Locke. Founder. Executive Chair. Majority Stakeholder. Clarissa had always thought she won because she walked away with the building, the brand, and the sympathy. But she'd never seen the foundations. The architecture beneath the name. I had spent the last 2 years rebuilding those beams until she was standing in a penthouse she didn't even realize I owned. I signed. Corin nodded, collected the documents, and handed them to a courier waiting outside. The trust is reinstated. Lockcrest's foundational clause is now under your protection, and we've restructured the board to include the original family trust as a voting member. Tessa leaned forward. That includes your daughter. I looked at her, brows raised. She doesn't even know about the trust. She will, Tessa said, by tomorrow morning. The trust. I'd buried it after the divorce. Sealed it away beneath multiple firms, not because I didn't believe in it, but because I wasn't ready to watch it fall into hands that would misuse it. Lockcrest had once been meant for Noelle. That had always been the plan. Until Clarissa and her family swept through it like locusts, leaving her future tangled in their vanity. But not anymore. I'd restored the trust. Quietly. Legally. Irrevocably. And Noelle's name was on it again. Not just symbolically, but as beneficiary, board proxy, and eventual successor. That afternoon, I invited her to meet me, neutral ground. A cafe near the water, tucked behind the marina, far from her mother's reach and the eyes of the press. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing jeans, a gray sweater, and sunglasses large enough to hide what the last few days had probably done to her. When she saw me, she hesitated, then walked over. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. We sat across from each other, 2 cups of tea between us, steam rising slowly into the cold air. "You signed the documents?" she asked. I did. "So it's yours again." I didn't correct her. Not because she was wrong, but because it wasn't about possession. It was about responsibility. "I've restored the original Locke family trust," I said. "The one you were removed from." She blinked. "I didn't know I was ever on it." "You were. Until shortly after the divorce. They used a technical clause to reallocate it. You were 17. Too young to contest it. Too distracted by everything going on. Why didn't you say anything?" I looked down at my tea. "Because I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between us. I didn't want the company to be another battlefield. You were a child. It wasn't your burden to carry." Tears rimmed her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "So what happens now?" "You're back on the trust," I said. "Full rights. Control when you're ready. Until then, you have board voting authority." She looked stunned. "I thought you hated what Lockcrest had become." "I did. But that's why I couldn't leave it in their hands." She swallowed. "Mom's furious. She says you manipulated everything." "I didn't manipulate anything. I did what she did, only better. I just never lied about who I did it for." There was a long silence between us, a fragile moment suspended in air. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me how bad it was?" I met her eyes. "Because I didn't want to win you back with money or power. I wanted to be your father, not your strategy." And that, finally, broke through whatever wall had been standing between us. She reached across the table and took my hand. Small, familiar. The same hand that once wrapped around my finger when she was an infant. The same hand I held through every scraped knee and dentist appointment and tearful breakup. "I wish I had asked sooner," she said. "I knew you would when you were ready." Later that night, Clarissa's father, Judge Conrad Grant, stood before his own legal advisory panel, grilled about signatures and authorizations tied to the trust transfers from years ago. His defense was weak, his paper trail weaker. And when Corin presented the override clause bearing his signature, dated 3 days before the trust was restructured illegally, the room shifted. "You won't get away with this," he growled at me, moments before he was escorted out of the review chamber. Corin barely looked up from his notes. "You already helped us do it, Judge. Your signature's on the override." Clarissa didn't show her face. She didn't call, not even to scream. Her empire had cracked, and she was buried beneath the weight of it. And for the first time in years, I slept, fully, deeply, without the ache of injustice beneath my ribs. Because I hadn't just reclaimed ownership of a company. I had given my daughter the future they tried to steal from both of us. And I did it without a single lie. I stood in the quiet of my penthouse living room, panes of floor-to-ceiling glass framing the city lights like jewels on black velvet, holding a glass of scotch I had no intention of finishing. On the coffee table lay a stack of unfiled reports, shareholder notices, and the court's final ruling on Lockcrest's ownership transfer. Tessa was still cross-referencing last-minute signatures in the adjacent study, and Corin was on the phone, giving his parting remarks to the last group of disgruntled advisors who hadn't yet come to terms with the new reality. It felt surreal, this calm after the storm. A storm I'd summoned, yes, but also one I'd weathered with deliberate composure. I'd thought revenge would feel sweet. Bitter, maybe, but undeniably sweet. Instead, it felt weightless, like stepping out of a tight coat after years of wearing it too small. Then my phone buzzed once, twice on the leather armrest. "Noelle." I read her message. "Can we talk?" "Not about today." I knew exactly what she meant. Tonight, no public spectacle. No revelations. Just father and daughter finding their way back to each other. I wiped my glass with the heel of my palm and walked to the door. "Tessa," I called. "I'm stepping out for a bit." She looked up, eyebrows raised. "Dinner. Just some air." I gave her a half grin. "Stay safe." She nodded, pocketing her tablet, and I slipped out into the elevator. The doors closed with a soft sigh, and I was alone with my thoughts as the car descended 20 floors. Outside, the city pulsed, headlights streaming, sirens distant, life unfolding without pause. I spotted a black SUV idling beneath the building's awning. Tessa's car. She must have insisted on following. though she knew I liked space. I waved her off as I walked past. I headed for the waterfront promenade, the same path where Noelle and I had our first real conversation after the engagement party fiasco. The breeze off the river was cool and carried the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Street lamps cast golden halos on the pavement, and the water glimmered like molten glass. I found her near the railing, hands in the pockets of her leather jacket, staring out at the water. She turned as I approached, her hair loose, catching the wind. "Hey," I said softly. "Hey," she echoed. We didn't speak for a moment, just looked at the city shimmer at our feet. Finally, I asked, "Need a drink?" She gave a small smile. Maybe something warm. I led her to a nearby cafe, one of those hidden gems with outdoor heaters and dark wood booths. We settled into a corner table, and a waitress brought us 2 mugs of hot chocolate, hers with whipped cream, mine with a shot of espresso. Noelle took a long sip, eyes closing for a second. "Thank you." "For what?" "For everything. Tonight, you." She paused, searching for words. "You stood up for me. Even when it meant tearing down everything She looked away, as though the reflection of the street felt safer than my eyes. "Everything I believed about my family." "No," I said. "I stood up for you. I stood up for the truth. And I did it because you deserve that. You deserve to know the people you love." She nodded. "I always trusted you. Even when I stopped talking to you. I trusted you." Her words hit me in my chest like a fist. "I know I wasn't perfect," I said. "I made mistakes. I let them push me away. I thought I was protecting you by staying silent. But maybe I was just protecting myself." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You protected me from the beginning. You just did it in ways I didn't understand." We sat in silence again, our mugs warming the space between us. I thought about Clarissa, about her fury, her denial, her absence now. No apology was coming. She didn't deserve one. And the silence between us was its own rebuke. Noelle broke the silence. "What will you do now?" I glanced at my watch, but the hour didn't matter. "What do you want me to do?" She looked at me, eyebrows wary. "I want my dad back." Not the strategist. Not the shareholder. Just you. I felt a flush in my throat, the kind that makes your voice catch. That's all I ever wanted. She smiled, small but real. "Then let's start." I squeezed her hand. "Anything you need." She hesitated. "Just stay with me tomorrow. Maybe talk about something else." "My trip to Spain next month. College visits." "Spain?" I repeated, smiling. "Yeah, tell me more." She leaned back, warmed by the chocolate and the promise of normalcy. "It's not just a trip. It's for my study abroad program. But I don't know if I should go. With everything that's happened, I feel like I need to be here." "You need to do what's best for you," I said. "If Spain is where you'll find yourself, you should go. I'll be here waiting." She nodded, biting her lip. "I'll think about it." We finished our drinks. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Books she'd been reading, a movie she wanted to see, her favorite coffee shop downtown. Normal things. Precious things. When we finally stepped back into the night air, the rain had fallen, just a sprinkle, enough to glisten on our jackets. I offered her my arm, and she linked hers through mine. "Thank you," she said again. "For what?" "For not letting me go without a fight." I paused under a lamppost, looking at her. "You never did." She looked up at me, a flicker of laughter in her eyes. "Good, because I don't know what I'd do without you." We walked back toward the building, footsteps echoing. I thought about the month to come, paperwork to finalize, board meetings, public announcements. But none of that felt as important as this moment. The real victory wasn't the company. It wasn't the court's final ruling. It was this, reclaiming the role I'd lost, rebuilding the bond I'd misplaced, and doing it without apology. Because some things don't need one. By the time we reached the entrance, Noelle paused. "Dad, yeah?" "Good night." "Good night, kiddo." I watched her head inside, safe and sure. Then I turned, walked to my car, and slid behind the wheel. And for the first time in a long time, I knew, without doubt, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. No apologies needed. Just the promise of tomorrow. 1 month later, the estate where I was shoved into a fountain was listed for sale. I saw the headline on a property wire at 8:30 in the morning. Grantwood Estate to be auctioned under bank order. A familiar photo accompanied the listing, the sprawling lawn, the stone fountain gleaming at its center, the balcony where Clarissa once delivered grand speeches like she was royalty. The caption below read, "Former home of the Grant family, now in foreclosure following financial restructuring. I didn't smile. Not right away. There was a moment, just a moment, where I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. A kind of quiet that felt deeper than peace. Final. Clarissa hadn't called. Mason hadn't reached out. Even Judge Grant had retreated into whatever retirement shell he built to escape the collapse. No statements. No spin. Just absence. It was perfect. I stood on the rooftop of my building, coffee in one hand, the city spread out in every direction like a world I finally owned again. Below me, cars moved like blood through arteries. Lives continued. But up here, it felt still. Balanced. Tessa stepped out from the elevator behind me, tablet in hand, sunglasses resting on her head. Her coat whipped in the spring wind. "You're up early," she said, approaching with her usual half-smirk. "I never sleep late," I replied. Too much noise in my head. She handed me the tablet. Next acquisition. Already in motion. Investors are waiting for green light by Friday. I scanned the document. Details of a media subsidiary we'd quietly begun circling weeks ago. It was perfect. Profitable. And vulnerable. Just the way I like them. As I handed the tablet back, Tessa lingered. "You smiled in that fountain," she said, eyes fixed on me. Most people would have snapped. Yelled. Lashed out. You smiled. I chuckled, a low, dry sound. Because it wasn't the real humiliation. What was? Thinking I ever needed their validation. I took a sip of my coffee and stared out at the skyline. The fountain was just water. Cold. Brief. What they did to me years before. That was the real betrayal. And I survived that. She studied me for a beat. "You're not like most clients." "No," I said. "I never was." Tessa didn't say anything for a moment. Then, more softly, "But that night changed you." I watched it. "It didn't change me," I said. "It revealed me." We both turned toward the edge of the rooftop, where a glass barrier separated us from the drop. A quiet hum of traffic floated upward, but here, it sounded far away, like the past. "Some people drown in moments like that," she said, her voice distant. "But not you." I thought about that night. The water clinging to my suit. The sound of champagne laughter behind me. Clarissa's triumphant smirk, already picturing the group chat messages she'd send with photos of me flailing in the fountain. I'd felt the cold pierce through every layer of pride I still had. But I didn't react the way they expected. I smiled. I let the moment freeze, and I owned it. "No," I answered her. I swam through it. She looked at me, eyebrows raised. And I walked out dry. That silence between us lingered, a soft kind of acknowledgement. The kind you share with someone who's seen your blood on the floor and never asked you to bleed again. I stepped away from the edge and headed back toward the stairwell, coffee in hand. "Get a new coat," I said over my shoulder. "We've got a press call at noon." "Yes, boss," she called after me. By the time I reached the office below, Corin was already waiting in the executive conference room. Crisp suit. Neutral expression. On the screen behind him was the company's new homepage, my homepage. Lock Strategic Holdings was now Lockcrest Global, and the landing page had changed overnight. It no longer bore the pristine, magazine-polished face of Clarissa or Mason or any other member of the old guard. It had mine. Not a posed portrait. Not airbrushed. Just me. Standing on the courthouse steps from last week's final hearing, suit damp from a light rain, umbrella folded at my side. Serious. Present. Real. Beneath the image was a quote I hadn't authorized, but had no intention of removing. "Sometimes the man you cast out is the one who rebuilds the house." Corin tilted his head toward the screen. "Too dramatic?" "No," I said, eyes still on the image. "Exactly right." He set a folder in front of me. Judge Grant officially recused himself from the trust oversight. Clarissa's assets have been frozen. Mason's involvement is under review. Everything you predicted is unfolding. I opened the folder slowly, scanning the signatures. Every page felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a home I was reclaiming. Not just for me, but for Noelle. "And my daughter?" I asked. Corin smiled slightly. "She's reviewing the Spain program. Asked me to vet the school's financial backing." "She trusts you now." "Good," I murmured. That's all I ever wanted. That afternoon, I stood at the same fountain I'd been pushed into, not at the estate, but in the park downtown. A similar marble design. Elegant. Circular. A symbolic reminder. But here, I was alone. I leaned on the edge, staring into the water. Clear. Still. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a photo. Noelle at age 6, holding my hand at her school's fall fair. Her smile was big, toothy. I remembered that day. She'd won a prize for naming all the planets in the solar system in order. I let the photo drift down into the fountain, not as an act of letting go, but of honoring the man who never stopped showing up, even when he was uninvited. The water rippled once, then settled. And me? I walked away dry. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but life has a funny way of circling back when you least expect it. You see, when I first met Laura, I thought she was everything I'd ever wanted. She had this way about her. Charming, confident, and with a laugh that could fill a room. Back then, I didn't notice the subtle hints, the little digs disguised as jokes, or the way she'd always make it clear she came from a better class of people. No, I was too caught up in her glow to notice the shadows lurking behind it. We met at a mutual friend's party. She wore this blue dress that clung to her like it had been made for her, and talked about her big dreams of being an event planner. I was smitten. At the time, I was just a guy with a dream. I had no money to my name, just ideas and determination. I told her about my plans to open a restaurant one day, to build something from the ground up, something I could be proud of. She smiled at me, tilted her head, and said, "That's cute, but do you think it's practical?" I should have seen it then, the way she dismissed it so easily. But I didn't. I thought she was being realistic, helping me stay grounded. Laura's family wasn't much different. The first time I met them, I felt like I was on trial. Her mother scrutinized my clothes, her father asked me about my 5-year plan, and her sister, Stephanie, looked me up and down like I was an outfit she wouldn't be caught dead wearing. "So, you're the chef," she'd said, as though the word tasted bitter. "No," I corrected her. "I'm an aspiring restaurateur." Stephanie laughed. This sharp little laugh that made me feel about 2 inches tall. Despite it all, I married Laura. Maybe I thought I could prove them wrong, that I could show them I was worth something. Or maybe I was just blind. Whatever it was, I said my vows and dove in headfirst, determined to make her proud. The years passed, and I worked. Oh, how I worked. I took on double shifts at a diner to save money. I spent nights drawing up business plans, researching locations, and meeting with suppliers. Every time I brought up my progress to Laura, she'd nod distractedly or change the subject. Once, I showed her a rough draft of my menu. "Why do you bother with this stuff?" she'd said, flipping through it without much interest. "It's not like it's going to happen anytime soon." Her words stung, but I kept going. I wasn't doing this for her approval anymore. I was doing it for me. And then, one day, I made it happen. I partnered with an old friend, someone who believed in my vision, and together we opened our first restaurant. I didn't tell Laura at first. She was already too busy complaining about how I wasn't earning enough, or how her sister's fiancé had just bought a new car. I didn't need her doubt to cloud my accomplishment. So, I kept it quiet. That's the thing about Laura. She was never outright cruel. It wasn't the kind of nastiness you could point to and call out. It was subtle. A passing comment, a dismissive tone, a laugh when you shared something personal. It chipped away at you, slowly, until you barely recognized yourself. Despite our rocky relationship, I kept showing up for her. Family dinners, holidays, awkward conversations with her father about how I wasn't progressing fast enough. I endured it all. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You endure. But then came Stephanie's engagement. Laura was practically glowing when she told me about it. "Steph's fiancé is amazing," she'd said, her eyes lighting up in a way they hadn't for me in years. "He's a hedge fund manager, and he's taking us all out to this incredible restaurant for the engagement party." That restaurant, as fate would have it, was one of mine. I remember the moment she told me. We were sitting in the living room, her scrolling through Pinterest for party ideas, and me silently wondering if I'd ever figure out where I fit into her life. She handed me the invitation like it was an afterthought, and I stared at the name of the venue, my venue, printed in elegant gold letters. "What do you think?" she asked, not even looking up. "It's nice," I said, folding the card and setting it on the table. "Nice," she scoffed. "This place is legendary. You've probably never even been to a restaurant like this before." I laughed, but it wasn't because her comment was funny. It was the kind of laugh you let out when the irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about an engagement party. This was about years of being dismissed, of being told I wasn't good enough. And now, they were walking into my world, completely unaware. That's when I decided. I wouldn't say a word. Let them have their party, let them laugh and joke at my expense. I wanted to see how far they'd go, how much they'd reveal about what they really thought of me. Because sometimes, the best way to show someone who you are is to let them tell you who they think you aren't. And when the time comes, you let the truth speak for itself. When Laura handed me the official invitation to Stephanie's engagement party, I had no idea how pivotal that night would become. Well, maybe I had a hunch. Life has a way of setting the stage long before the curtains rise, doesn't it? It was a crisp evening when Laura tossed the gilded card onto the coffee table like it was nothing more than a grocery flyer. She didn't say much, just a casual, "Here's Steph's engagement invite. Make sure you clear your schedule." Not a question, not a suggestion, a directive. I picked up the card, running my fingers over the embossed letters. "You are cordially invited to the engagement celebration of Stephanie and Richard." Beneath that, the address of the venue. My venue. Now, let me paint you a picture. This wasn't just any restaurant. This place had become the jewel in the crown of my business empire. It was the culmination of years of sweat, sleepless nights, and more setbacks than I could count. Every square inch of that space, every detail, every decision, had my fingerprint on it. And yet, here I was, being told to clear my schedule, so I could attend it like some dutiful husband tagging along for appearances. Laura's voice broke my thoughts. "What's that look for?" "What look?" I asked, setting the invitation down. She waved her hand dismissively. "That weird smile. Don't be awkward about this. Stephanie and Richard are hosting this at one of the top restaurants in the city. You're lucky to even step foot in a place like that." Ah, there it was. Another jab disguised as a harmless comment. I'd grown used to these little barbs, but this one hit differently. Lucky to step foot in my own restaurant? The irony was almost too much to bear. But I didn't say a word. I simply nodded and mumbled something about how it sounded nice. Inside, though, I was already imagining how the night might unfold. Would Laura recognize the staff? Would she see my name on the little plaque in the lobby? Or would she be too busy fawning over Stephanie's hedge fund fiancé to notice? The weeks leading up to the party were a blur of Laura's frantic planning. Every evening, she'd come home with shopping bags, trying on dress after dress in front of the mirror while muttering about how she didn't want to be outshined by her sister. "Do you think this makes me look successful?" she asked one night, spinning in a sleek, emerald green gown. I tilted my head. "It makes you look great." She rolled her eyes. "That's not what I asked. I need to look like someone who belongs. Stephanie's fiancé, Richard, is very accomplished. I don't want us looking like the poor relations." Ah, yes. Appearances. That had always been Laura's focus. It didn't matter that I worked 12-hour days, or that I was building something bigger than myself. To her, success only counted if it came with visible perks, designer suits, luxury cars, and dinner reservations at high-profile venues. "Don't worry," I said, unable to resist the smallest smirk. "I'm sure you'll make quite the impression." When the day of the engagement party finally arrived, Laura was a whirlwind of nerves. She fussed over every detail, from her hair to her shoes, while I calmly slipped into a tailored suit. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, just like everything else I wore or owned. "Are you ready yet?" she called from the other room. "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied, grabbing my car keys. The drive to the restaurant was filled with Laura's chatter about Stephanie's perfect life. "Did you know Richard's family has vacation homes in Europe? And he's already talking about buying Steph a Tesla as an engagement gift. Isn't that romantic?" Romantic? Sure. If your idea of romance is a price tag. We pulled up to the restaurant, and Laura's face lit up as she stepped out of the car. The venue was impressive. I'll give her that. Elegant lighting spilled out onto the sidewalk, and the doorman greeted us with a warm smile. Of course, he recognized me immediately, but he didn't let it show. Professionalism is a standard we maintain at my establishments. Inside, the space was alive with soft music, clinking glasses, and the murmur of well-dressed guests. Laura beamed as she spotted her family near the center of the room, waving us over. As we approached, Stephanie turned and squealed, "Laura, you look amazing." "And you," Laura gushed, "look like you just walked out of a bridal magazine." The two of them hugged tightly, leaving me standing awkwardly to the side. "And this must be your husband," Stephanie said, finally acknowledging me with a glance. "I'm so glad you could make it. I'm sure this place is a real step up from whatever you're used to." I chuckled softly, biting back a reply. If only she knew. The party was just getting started, and I could already feel the undercurrent of judgment in every interaction. Laura's parents greeted me with lukewarm smiles, while Richard's family barely acknowledged my existence. It was clear I was an outsider in their eyes, a footnote in Laura's more glamorous story. But I wasn't there to make waves. Not yet, anyway. I played my part, shaking hands, making small talk, and blending into the background. Little did they know, the background was mine. You know how people say you can feel the energy shift in a room? Well, that's exactly what happened the moment we walked into the restaurant. For me, it was like stepping into my own kingdom, one I'd built brick by brick. But to everyone else in that room, I was just Laura's husband. The place looked spectacular, if I do say so myself. Soft, ambient lighting bathed the room in a warm glow, and every table was adorned with fresh floral centerpieces and perfectly folded linen napkins. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was an experience, and tonight, it was hosting the engagement party of the year. Laura clung to my arm as we made our way to the main table where her family was seated. Her grip wasn't affectionate, it was performative. The kind of hold that screamed, "Look at us, we're the perfect couple." Funny how illusions work, isn't it? "Laura, you're finally here." Stephanie stood up from her seat, her sparkly dress catching the light as she rushed over to hug Laura. They exchanged air kisses like they were the stars of some reality show. Stephanie glanced at me briefly, her polite smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Oh, and you brought him." Him. That's all I was to her. Not my name. Not my identity. Just Laura's husband. I smiled, keeping my expression neutral. "It's good to see you too, Stephanie." Her fiancé, Richard, was quick to jump in. "Welcome, welcome. Feel free to grab a drink. The bar's open." He turned back to Stephanie, clearly uninterested in anything I had to say. I let Laura lead me to our seats, which, unsurprisingly, were placed at the far end of the table. Strategic, no doubt. The closer seats were reserved for the people who mattered, and I wasn't on that list. As the evening progressed, I couldn't help but notice how seamlessly everyone slipped into their roles. Stephanie played the glowing bride-to-be, laughing at all the right moments and gushing over her fiancé's every word. Richard's family oozed wealth, their designer clothes and expensive jewelry a constant reminder of their status. And then there was Laura, my wife. The woman who once told me she believed in me, but now seemed more interested in pretending I didn't exist. She was in her element, laughing at inside jokes with her sister, and leaning into Richard's mother's compliments like a sponge soaking up water. I sat there quietly, sipping my drink and observing the scene. That's when the first dig came. "So, Laura," Stephanie began, her voice loud enough to catch the attention of nearby tables, "tell us more about your husband's work. What does he do again?" Laura hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, you know, he's figuring things out. Nothing big, but he's very passionate about his little projects." Little projects. That was how she framed years of hard work and sacrifice. I felt a flicker of anger rise in my chest, but I forced it down. This wasn't the time. Richard's mother, a woman with the kind of sharp features that made her look permanently unimpressed, chimed in. "Passion is nice, but stability is better. My Richard, for example, is already managing portfolios worth millions. Isn't that right, darling?" "Absolutely," Richard replied, his tone smug. "Stability is everything in today's world." The table laughed, and I felt their eyes briefly land on me, as if I were some sort of cautionary tale. I offered a tight smile and took another sip of my drink, letting their words roll off my back. But then Laura joined in. "Yes, stability is important," she said, her voice laced with a subtle edge. It's why I'm so proud of Stephanie and Richard. They're the perfect match. Some of us could learn a thing or two from them. Some of us. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. She wasn't even trying to hide her disdain anymore. By now, the staff had begun serving dinner. Plates of beautifully arranged appetizers were placed in front of each guest, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was my team, my vision come to life, and yet I was sitting at this table as though I had nothing to do with it. As the night wore on, the comments became less subtle. "You must be so lucky to eat out at places like this," one of Stephanie's cousins said, nodding toward the room. "A big step up from whatever fast food joints you're used to, huh?" Laura laughed lightly, brushing her fingers through her hair. "Oh, he's not picky. He'll eat anything, really." The table erupted into laughter, and I felt my fists clench under the tablecloth. It wasn't just the mockery. It was the sheer audacity of it all. They had no idea who I really was, no clue that the very space they were sitting in was my creation. But I wasn't angry, not really. If anything, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Because here's the thing, they were writing their own downfall. Every snide comment, every dismissive laugh, every glance that dismissed me as unimportant, it was all building up to the moment when the truth would come crashing down. And believe me, that moment was coming. Dinner was in full swing, and the room buzzed with laughter and chatter. But at our table, it was less family celebration and more roast the odd one out. Guess who the odd one out was? I sat there, my fork idly pushing around the beautifully plated steak, my restaurant's specialty, while the conversation veered dangerously close to being outright cruel. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was open season, and I was the target. "Laura," Stephanie said, her voice dripping with faux curiosity, "how do you two make it work? I mean, Richard and I are always so aligned on, well, everything. But it must be hard when you're with someone who's still figuring things out." The way she said, "figuring things out," made it sound like I was a lost puppy wandering around aimlessly. Laura didn't miss a beat. "Oh, it's definitely challenging," she said with a tight smile, swirling her wine like she was pondering some great philosophical truth. "But, I've learned to be patient. Not everyone moves at the same pace." A ripple of laughter followed, soft and polite, but I could feel the sting of it. Not everyone moves at the same pace. She might as well have said, "I'm dragging this dead weight through life." Richard chimed in, grinning smugly. "It's all about finding your lane, right? Not everyone is cut out for the fast track." "Exactly," Laura agreed. "Some people are better off taking their time. Slowly, very slowly." The laughter grew louder this time, and I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see if I'd defend myself. But I didn't. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Then came Laura's father, who always seemed to take the opportunity to remind me of my supposed shortcomings. He leaned back in his chair, wiping his mouth with a napkin. I've been telling Laura for years that she deserves someone who can provide for her. Someone with ambition. Not just dreams, real results. Isn't that right, Laura?" Laura nodded, her face lighting up like he'd just given the toast of the century. "Yes, Dad. Exactly." Stephanie's fiancé, Richard, leaned forward, his grin as wide as the Grand Canyon. "So, what is it you do these days?" he asked, feigning interest. I met his gaze, calm and steady. "I manage a few things here and there," I said casually, giving him nothing. Richard chuckled, exchanging a knowing glance with Stephanie. "Well, it must be nice to have so much free time. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real responsibility." The table erupted into laughter again, and Laura leaned over to me, her voice barely a whisper. "Just let it go," she said, patting my hand as if I needed comfort. "They don't mean anything by it." Sure, nothing at all. But the final blow came from Laura herself. As the plates were being cleared, Stephanie complimented the restaurant, gushing about the decor and the food. "This place is stunning," she said. "Whoever owns it must really know what they're doing." I mean, it's leagues above anything we're used to, isn't it, Laura? Laura didn't hesitate. "Oh, absolutely. It's the kind of place you'd never expect, someone like my husband to afford. But he's lucky he has me, right?" That did it. The laughter, the sneers, the condescension. It all blurred together into a cacophony of disrespect. They didn't see me. They never had. To them, I was just the guy who wasn't good enough for their high standards. But they didn't know the truth. I glanced around the room, taking in the space I had built with my own hands. The staff bustled around, carrying out their duties with the precision and professionalism I'd instilled in them. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was my legacy. And yet, here I was, sitting at a table full of people who thought I was nothing more than Laura's underachieving husband. I smiled to myself, a small, private smile that none of them noticed. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Because soon enough, the joke would be on them. You ever have one of those moments where everything slows down, and you just know something is about to change? That's what it felt like for me, sitting there at the table as Laura and her family continued their little comedy hour at my expense. I'd been holding it together all night, letting their comments roll off me like water off a duck's back. But even a duck gets tired of being wet, right? The moment came when one of Stephanie's cousins, his name doesn't even matter, decided to take things up a notch. He was this guy who looked like he'd spent more time picking out his suit than reading a book. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his whiskey like he was on a talk show, and said, "You know, Laura, it's a shame your husband didn't choose something more stable. Restaurants are so risky, aren't they? Half of them fail within the first year." Laura laughed lightly, not even looking at me. "Oh, I've told him that so many times. But you know how stubborn he is. He just doesn't listen." The table erupted in laughter, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. It was more like a quiet resolve, a little voice in my head whispering, "Enough?" Then Richard, Stephanie's hedge fund fiancé, decided to pile on. "You know, Laura, if he ever wants some real career advice, I'd be happy to sit down with him. Show him how to make some actual money." Actual money. It was Laura's turn to chime in. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Oh, don't put that on yourself, Richard. He's always been more of a dreamer. I don't think he'd survive a day in the corporate world." And there it was, the breaking point. I sat back in my chair, looking around the table at all these faces, smug and self-satisfied, basking in their own superiority. They didn't know, of course. They had no idea that every bite of food they were eating, every sip of wine they were enjoying, was all thanks to me. I could have let it go. I could have smiled politely, kept my head down, and gone home to stew in silence like I had so many times before. But not tonight. "Excuse me," I said, standing up and brushing the imaginary crumbs from my suit. "I need a moment." Laura barely glanced at me. "Don't take too long," she said. "The toasts are about to start." I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you give when you're happy. It was the kind of smile you give when you're holding something back, something big. I walked away from the table, weaving through the crowd of guests and staff. Everywhere I turned, I saw the fruits of my labor. The chandeliers I'd chosen, the custom furniture I'd commissioned, the menu I'd spent countless nights perfecting. I found my general manager, a sharp, capable woman named Elena, standing near the bar. "Elena," I said, keeping my voice low, "I need a favor." She raised an eyebrow. "What kind of favor?" I explained the situation in as few words as possible, and her eyes widened. Then, slowly, a grin spread across her face. "Oh, this is going to be good," she said. "Consider it handled." I nodded and made my way back to the table, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about reclaiming my dignity, about reminding myself, and them, that I wasn't the man they thought I was. As I sat down, Laura glanced at me and frowned. "You were gone long enough," she said. I didn't respond. I just smiled that same quiet smile, waiting for the moment to come. And then it did. Elena stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room, her voice carrying over the soft hum of the crowd. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," she said, her tone professional but warm. "I hope you're all enjoying your evening here at one of our finest establishments. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone very special to this restaurant." The room quieted, and I saw Laura's brow furrow in confusion. "This person has been instrumental in making this place what it is today," Elena continued. Without their vision, dedication, and hard work, none of this would be possible. A few heads turned, curious. Stephanie whispered something to Richard, who shrugged. Elena smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing the owner of this restaurant. Mr. Insert protagonist's name. For a moment, there was silence. And then, slowly, heads began to turn in my direction. Laura's face froze, her mouth slightly open as she stared at me. Stephanie's hand flew to her chest in exaggerated shock. Richard just looked confused, as if someone had started speaking a foreign language. I stood, smoothing out my suit jacket, and gave a small nod to the crowd. Thank you, Elena, I said, my voice calm and steady. And thank you all for being here tonight. It's always an honor to host events like this, especially when they're so close to home. I glanced at Laura, her face pale and her eyes wide, and felt the weight of years of disrespect lift off my shoulders. This was my moment, and I wasn't done yet. I stood there, letting the weight of my words sink in, savoring the stunned silence that followed. It was like the entire room had momentarily forgotten how to breathe. Laura's face was a picture, pale, mouth slightly open, her perfectly composed exterior cracking in real time. Stephanie looked like someone had told her the stock market just crashed, and Richard? He was trying to process what he just heard. His smug grin replaced with a blank, blinking expression. For years, I had stayed silent. For years, I had let them mock me, dismiss me, and treat me like I was nothing more than an accessory in Laura's world. But tonight, the truth wasn't just going to come out, it was going to shine. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady and carrying across the room. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves tonight. It's an honor to host such a beautiful event for Stephanie and Richard. Family is important, isn't it? I let the question hang in the air, my eyes briefly meeting Laura's. She looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. I wanted to take this opportunity, I continued, to share a little story. You see, this restaurant, this very space you're all sitting in, started as nothing more than a dream. A dream that many people, including some at this very table, I gestured toward Laura's side of the room, thought was impractical, unrealistic, even foolish. There were murmurs in the crowd now, heads turning to look at Laura, who was staring at her wine glass like it held the answers to the universe. But dreams, I said, smiling slightly, are funny things. They don't care about practicality. They don't care about what people think. They only care about the person willing to chase them. I stepped closer to the head table, looking directly at Richard. And as it turns out, Richard, restaurants aren't just risky. They're also incredibly rewarding, when you know what you're doing. The crowd chuckled softly, and I caught a flicker of irritation cross Richard's face. Good. I shifted my focus to Laura. You know, Laura, I always appreciated your candidness about my ambitions. Your skepticism kept me grounded, even when I didn't want to hear it. And tonight, as I stand here, I realize something. I couldn't have done it without you. Because every dismissive comment, every joke at my expense, pushed me to work harder. To prove that I wasn't just dreaming, I was building. Laura's eyes darted around the room, searching for some kind of escape, but there was none. The audience was rapt, hanging on my every word. I turned back to the guests. And so, here we are. 11 years later, standing in one of the most successful restaurants in the city, one of 4 that I now own. The room erupted into applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, enthusiastic, and deafening. People were cheering, some even standing, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. But I wasn't done yet. I raised a hand to quiet the room, then glanced at Elena, who nodded and stepped forward with a document folder in hand. This, I said, holding up the folder, is the service agreement for this event. A contract that, among other things, outlines our policy on behavior. Specifically, Section 3.2, which states that any customers who verbally abuse or humiliate our staff or ownership will be asked to leave the premises immediately. The silence was deafening. I looked directly at Laura's father, then at Stephanie, and finally at Richard. Now, I've been patient tonight. I've smiled through the jokes, the insults, the condescension. But as much as I value family, I value respect more. And tonight, respect has been in very short supply. Stephanie gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Are you saying we've disrespected you? I'm saying exactly that, I replied, my voice calm but firm. And as much as it pains me to do this, I motioned to Elena. I'm afraid I have to ask your party to leave. Chaos erupted. Laura's father jumped up, sputtering about how this was outrageous. Stephanie started whining about how I was ruining her special night, while Richard tried to puff out his chest and argue. But Elena remained calm, signaling to the staff to begin clearing the table. Laura, meanwhile, just sat there, frozen. She didn't say a word, didn't argue, didn't even look at me. Maybe she finally realized that this wasn't a moment she could manipulate or spin in her favor. The staff moved quickly and efficiently, clearing plates and glasses as the crowd watched in stunned silence. Laura's family tried to protest, but the security team stepped in, calmly escorting them toward the door. As they were being led out, Richard turned to me, his face red with anger. You'll regret this, he spat. I smiled. I already regret not doing it sooner. The room was quiet now, the chaos left in the wake of their exit settling like dust after a storm. I turned to the remaining guests and gave a small bow. Apologies for the disruption. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. The applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was thunderous. For the first time in years, I felt like I had reclaimed something I'd lost. And as I stood there, watching the crowd return to their conversations and laughter, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about respect. For myself. For my journey. I'd let them belittle me for too long. But not anymore. As the door closed behind Laura, her family, and their entourage, the silence in the restaurant hung in the air like the final note of a symphony. For a moment, I stood there, watching the shocked expressions on the remaining guests' faces slowly transform into something else. Admiration. Respect. Vindication. Then the applause started, hesitant at first, but it grew louder, more confident, until it filled the room. Strangers clapped and cheered, some even standing as they showed their support. It wasn't just for the food or the service. It was for me, for the man who'd stood up and reclaimed his dignity. Elena approached me, her usual calm professionalism giving way to a small, satisfied grin. Well handled, she said. I'd say you've just earned yourself a few dozen new loyal customers. I nodded, feeling the weight of the evening settle over me. Thanks, Elena. Let's make sure the remaining guests are taken care of. Drinks on the house. She nodded and returned to her duties, leaving me to stand in the center of my restaurant, reflecting on everything that had just unfolded. This wasn't how I'd planned it. I never wanted a confrontation like this, let alone a public one. But as I replayed the events of the night in my mind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. For years, I'd endured Laura's dismissiveness, her family's ridicule, and their belief that I was somehow less than them. Tonight, I'd shown everyone, that their judgments and opinions no longer had power over me. As the guests resumed their meals, I slipped away to my office upstairs. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and I needed a moment to collect my thoughts. Sitting at my desk, I stared at the framed photo on the wall, a picture of the restaurant on opening night. I remembered standing outside, watching the first customers walk through the doors and feeling a mix of pride and fear. Back then, I'd believed that success would earn me respect, that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, people like Laura and her family would finally see my worth. But tonight, I realized something important. Respect isn't given, it's demanded. And sometimes, you have to stop waiting for others to recognize your value and claim it for yourself. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. My phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages, emails, notifications. At first, I thought it was just fallout from the previous night, but when I opened my social media accounts, I saw the real story. Videos of the confrontation had gone viral. Guests had recorded everything. Laura's family's behavior, my calm response, and the moment I revealed myself as the owner of the restaurant. One clip, in particular, had already racked up thousands of views. Richard's angry face as he yelled, "You'll regret this," and my response, "I already regret not doing it sooner." The internet, as it does, took the story and ran with it. Memes of Laura's family started popping up everywhere. Stephanie's overly dramatic gasp became a reaction gif, and Richard's "real money" comment turned into a running joke. But the real star of the show was Laura's mother. Someone had caught her screeching at the staff as they cleared the table, her face twisted in outrage. The pasta lady, as she was now dubbed, became an instant meme. At first, I didn't know how to feel about it. The whole thing was surreal, watching my private life become public entertainment. But then I started reading the comments. This guy is a legend. Imagine mocking your husband in his restaurant. Karma is real. Respect to him for handling it with so much class. For every troll or critic, there were dozens of messages of support. People shared their own stories of dealing with toxic family members, of standing up for themselves after years of being underestimated. Laura's family, unsurprisingly, didn't take it well. By midday, Laura had posted a long, dramatic rant on social media, painting herself as the victim. She accused me of embarrassing her, ruining Stephanie's engagement party, and being a vindictive husband who couldn't let go of a grudge. Her post gained traction, sympathy from people who didn't know the full story, but it didn't last long. Someone quickly posted one of the viral videos in the comments, followed by another and another. The narrative shifted almost instantly. Maybe don't mock your husband in front of everyone? Wow, this family is toxic. Glad he stood up for himself. By the end of the day, Laura had deleted her post, but the damage was done. Her family became the subject of local gossip, and even Richard's company issued a statement distancing themselves from his behavior, citing their commitment to integrity and respect. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from their judgment, their ridicule, their expectations. And as I sat in my office that evening, reading the flood of supportive messages from strangers, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice, my story, and my life. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. And sometimes, the happiest ending is simply walking away with your head held high. In the days that followed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. The confrontation at the engagement party was more than just a dramatic scene. It was a declaration of independence. For the first time, I wasn't seeking anyone's approval, least of all Laura's. The fallout, however, was swift and unrelenting. Laura's family, already notorious for their inflated sense of self-importance, found themselves at the center of a public spectacle. The viral videos and memes continued to circulate, making them the talk of the town. And not in the way they were used to. Laura, true to form, called me 2 days after the incident. I stared at the phone as it buzzed on my desk, her name flashing across the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't waste time. "How could you do this to us?" she demanded, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "You humiliated me. You embarrassed my family in front of everyone." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words wash over me. "Humiliated you?" I said calmly. "Laura, all I did was tell the truth. Everything that happened that night was a consequence of your actions and your family's." "You don't understand," she snapped. "Richard's company is furious. Stephanie's engagement is falling apart. And my parents won't stop blaming me for booking the restaurant. You've ruined everything." There it was. Not an ounce of accountability. No apology, no recognition of the years of disrespect and belittlement. Just the same self-serving narrative I'd grown used to. "I didn't ruin anything, Laura," I said, my voice firm. "Your family created this mess, and I'm not cleaning it up for you. I've spent too many years being your punching bag, but that ends now." She tried to argue, to twist the situation in her favor, but I wasn't having it. I ended the call and blocked her number. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was the culmination of years of frustration and hurt. Walking away from Laura wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my life. The days turned into weeks, and the restaurant thrived like never before. The viral incident brought in waves of new customers, people who wanted to support the man who had stood up for himself. Elena joked that we should name a dish after the event, a spicy pasta called the Henderson, but I told her we'd stick to our original menu. As for Laura's family, their lives took a different turn. Richard's company quietly demoted him, distancing themselves from the scandal. Stephanie's engagement was postponed indefinitely, and her once perfect world began to unravel. Laura's parents, once so proud of their perfect daughters, retreated from the public eye, unable to escape the shadow of the viral videos. And me? I flourished. The restaurant continued to grow, and I expanded into new ventures, opening 2 more locations in neighboring cities. My story became an inspiration for others, a reminder that standing up for yourself, no matter how long it takes, is always worth it. I didn't just rebuild my life. I redefined it. I surrounded myself with people who valued and respected me, who saw my worth without needing to be convinced. And I realized something important. My success wasn't just about proving Laura and her family wrong. It was about proving myself right. One afternoon, as I walked through the bustling dining room of my flagship restaurant, I felt a deep sense of pride. Every table was filled, every guest enjoying the experience I'd worked so hard to create. I wasn't just running a business, I was living my dream. Laura's voice no longer haunted me. Her dismissive comments, her family's ridicule, it all felt like a distant memory, a chapter of my life I'd closed for good. And that's the thing about life. Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air, to strip away everything holding you back so you can finally see the path ahead. For me, the storm came in the form of an engagement party gone wrong. But in the end, it wasn't about the drama or the fallout. It was about finding the strength to stand tall and walk away, knowing that I didn't need anyone's validation to succeed. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Some chapters deserve to end. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is let go and move forward, toward a life that's truly your own.